Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Advanced Clean Fleets Workgroup meeting sponsored by the California Air Resources Board. Today's meeting will focus on the public fleet requirements of the proposed Advanced Clean Fleets regulation and is meant to continue the discussion on topics raised by public fleet stakeholders during our September 9th, 2021 workshop. Today's meeting is the first of several workgroup meetings that are being planned with focused topic areas including high priority fleets, small fleets, zero emission vehicle fueling infrastructure, and on the emissions inventory. Details regarding these upcoming meetings will be made available on our Advanced Clean Fleets website. Our workgroup meeting today is part of our Advanced Clean Fleets regulatory efforts of achieving a zero-emission truck and bus California fleet by 2045 everywhere feasible and significantly earlier for certain market segments such as last mile delivery and drayage applications. Our goal of this effort is to accelerate the number of medium and heavy-duty zero-emission vehicle purchases to help achieve a full transition to zero-emission vehicles in California as soon as possible. And let me remind everyone that today's meeting will be recorded, is being recorded, and a copy of this recording will be made available on our website in the following days. My name is Craig During, and I am managing the efforts for the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. I will be joined shortly by several of my colleagues, including Tony Brazil, branch chief of our Mobile Source Control Division, Paul Arnasia, lead staff for this regulation, and our presenter today, Chris Franceschi. So the purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the public fleet requirements of the draft regulation language that was released for public comment on August 25th. Our intention is to allow for full and open communication throughout the meeting and allow for our public fleet stakeholders to ask questions, seek clarification, and provide comments specific to the public fleet portion of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. With that said, we will first present a brief overview of the public fleet requirements and then open the meeting to participant comments and questions for the remainder of our scheduled 3-hour allotted time. And let me remind our participants that our focus today is on the public fleet requirements of the regulation. Therefore, I encourage everyone to hold any questions or comments related to other topics such as high priority fleets, drayage fleets, small fleets, and infrastructure for future workgroup meetings that are currently being planned. Okay, in case you haven't already downloaded them, the materials for today's meeting are available on our Advanced Clean Fleets website by clicking on the Meetings and Events link. This includes access to the presentation, the draft regulation language, and links to our informal comment log and comment submittal form. Informal comments on this regulation and the regulation language or cost assumptions can be made during this workgroup meeting or can be submitted by October 29th, 2021, using the comment submittal form link I just mentioned. And I want to let everyone know that we just posted an updated version of today's presentation. So feel free to visit our website and download the newest version of this presentation. Okay, I would also like to point out that since the August 2018 introduction of the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation, CARB staff have hosted several meetings to provide information to the public and solicit feedback. This includes 5 prior workshop meetings, 2 prior workgroup meetings, and an infrastructure forum that was held in June of 2021. In addition, CARB staff have conducted more than 150 individual and community-focused meetings, with more than 175 stakeholder groups and associations. And as I mentioned earlier, we plan to continue our outreach efforts with our stakeholders and communities as we move forward with the final development stages of this regulation. So let me remind everyone again that this meeting will be recorded and made available during our workshop and made available on our website, for those unable to attend or interested in viewing again. During the meeting, the chat feature will not be available. Therefore, you will only be able to ask a question or make a comment verbally by raising your hand and using your microphone. We will call upon individuals in the order your hand was raised. When called upon, we will ask you to unmute your mic and state your comment or question. As a reminder, please introduce yourself by stating your name and affiliation before you make a statement or ask a question. Due to the expected large number of participants, I would very much appreciate if speakers can limit your comments to no more than 2, maybe 3 minutes, so others have an opportunity to speak. And finally, if you experience technical difficulties during the meeting, please email Harinder Figura for assistance. His email address can be found on the meeting notification bulletin you received to register for this event. And I will put, well, I guess I won't. All right, so with that said, let me introduce our presenter today, Chris Franceschi, who will walk us through today's presentation. Chris?
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Franceschi, and I'm an air pollution specialist working on the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. Today's meeting will be mostly focused on discussion and feedback from public fleets, so we'll keep the presentation short. I'll cover some quick background, rehash the concepts for public fleets discussed at the September workshop, and then open it up for discussion. As many of you know, the draft regulation language was posted at the end of August. We have extended the comment period. Oh, excuse me, on my speaking notes here. So in September 20, we had the workshop and discussed the regulation language and costs. And today we're continuing the dialogue for public fleets. And as Craig already mentioned, there are additional focused work groups planned. There are the high priority and federal fleets, the small fleets, and the emissions inventory work groups. And there will be a series of infrastructure meetings where we'll be able to discuss all the infrastructure issues. So as many of you know, the draft regulation language was posted at the end of August. We have extended the comment period for the language to October 29, but we will also accept comments and feedback, and we'll leave the comment docket open after that date. The sooner we get detailed comments, the better we are able to incorporate them into the final rule proposals. We anticipate bringing a recommendation to the board in late summer or fall of 2022. I will now quickly cover the public fleets portion of the proposed rulemaking so we can get right to open discussion. The public fleet rule would cover any public agency, excluding federal agencies, operating in California, vehicles over 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. A quick correction to this and the September workshop slide on this topic. This would apply to all public fleet vehicles regardless of fuel type, not just those that operate diesel fuel vehicles. This is a list of the vehicles that would be exempt from this portion of the regulation. Public fleets would be required to purchase zero-emission vehicles, or ZEVs, when buying new vehicles, starting with half of the vehicle purchases in 2024 and increasing to 100% of purchases starting 2027. Near zero-emission vehicles, or NZEVs, can be purchased until 2035 if no ZEV is available, and the red highlighted counties in the map on the right would have a delayed start date of these requirements starting in 2027. Used ZEVs, or vehicles retrofit or repowered to ZEV powertrains, would also count as compliant purchases. Exemptions for emergency response situations would be limited to those providing electricity, natural gas, water, and/or wastewater services. No more than a quarter of the fleet would be able to use exemptions. Additionally, the public fleet must also have 75% of the requested vehicle type as ZEVs already in the fleet, and show that no infrastructure or fueling options for ZEVs are available, no NZEV is available, and why additional ZEVs would limit the agency's ability to provide that emergency service. Reporting of agency and vehicle information would be required annually by March 1st, and agencies must keep records and provide them upon request. Additional information can be found at the Advanced Clean Fleets program page. And this actually concludes the presentation recap. So we'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions. Please use the raise hand feature, and we'll do our best to get to every question or comment, but may not have enough time due to the size of the meeting. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Craig and Tony.
Okay, let's jump right in. I see a few hands raised.
Okay.
So Craig already provided you the basic intro, and so we'll work through it and have a discussion here on any of these topics associated with the rule.
Yeah, Tony, and just a reminder for those that are going to be speaking, please introduce yourself, state your name and your affiliation, and then go ahead and ask your question or state your comment.
Okay, so first I see Monique Van Bangala, then after that Harmony Gates. So Monique, are you giving you permission to speak? Could you give your affiliation and begin? Or unmute yourself first and then begin? So it shows you're muted on my end, on your end still, so you would need to unmute yourself.
Maybe we can come back.
All right, we can go to the next commenter and come back to Monique. So next I see Harmony Gates. So Harmony, I've unmuted you, so if you could unmute yourself and then give your affiliation and begin.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, this is Harmony Gates with York Engineering. I just wanted to clarify the first couple years say 50%. So is this at least 50%? So if you're purchasing only one vehicle that year, it must be ZEV. And if you're purchasing 3 vehicles, then 2 of them must be ZEV in order for the 50% to be achieved.
Yeah, so the language does have a rounding provision. So in your example of one vehicle, the 50% would be 0.5. So that does round up to 1. So that would have to be a ZEV purchase if it was only one purchase. In your example of 3, then again, it's 3 times the 50% would be again 1.5. So that does happen to round up to 2. So that's kind of the way it would work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Harmony. Okay, we'll go back to Monique. After that is Eva Plastier. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Okay, so I've unmuted, but wait.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Eva Plaza at Rancho California Water District. I really want to say thank you for holding this meeting and letting us engage and comment on this. This is very important to us because it can substantially impact our ability to provide sanitation services and emergency services to our communities. You said that you will also hold additional work group meetings on infrastructure, so I will hold those comments to Dan because we have tremendous concerns with the current state of infrastructure and our ability to utilize electric vehicles to provide emergency response. What I want to do is, and I think we have some additional meetings coming up through Aqua and some others, so a lot of this might be repeated, but what I wanted you to see is what we in the water industry deal with. I don't know if we can share screens, maybe that's better saved for our Aqua meeting, but we deal with fires, floods, and various emergencies on a fairly frequent basis. So we really want you to consider the emergency exemptions and how you're putting them together for my part is the water industry. You said, you know, you have to have 75% of your fleet already electric to be given a 25% exemption. For us, we have 4 crews that are emergency construction crews. We have 4 F-550s, and we sometimes deploy all 4 of them. So if the technology is not there to have a fully functioning F-550 or equivalent, you will, in essence, handicap us in our emergency response. So I really want you to think carefully about that and maybe put a timer on it or some sort of a when availability of technology. The biggest concern for us is the availability of technology. And I've heard people say, oh, it's there. And we engage with the manufacturers, and we just don't see it yet. We don't see it for what we need done. It will come. I have full faith it will come. You know how long it took the combustion engine technology to develop, the batteries and everything will develop. I just want to make sure that the regulation does not handicap us in terms of emergency response and being able to do sanitation. So we will be providing a comment letter, and the big thing for us is emergency response. So if there's, you know, other people want to comment, I want to give them time. If there's more time, I'll be happy to talk some more. And we also have an aqua meeting with you guys, I think next week, to maybe talk about this in detail.
I'll just say I appreciate that. And on that topic, to the extent that you are submitting comments or provide us information later, we would appreciate a little bit of an understanding of your actual operation and whether the vehicles you're referring to are in essence providing emergency support outside of your service area versus inside your service area, because we see those as a little bit different.
You know,
and understanding that difference.
Yeah, Tony and Craig, we would love, if you would like to do a one-on-one, we would love to meet with you, and we can show you pictures. If you want to tour our facilities, we can let you tour our facilities. For example, we provided support to Paradise Irrigation District. Our crews deployed for 2 months, and there was no ability to recharge those vehicles up there. Okay, we've sent 10 people up there. So we do mutual aid all the time with our neighboring agencies for water service. So if we had electric vehicles, we would not be able to offer assistance to Paradise, and Paradise was fully destroyed. There was no charging ability, no anything. So having that ability, until the technology is there, I have full faith that technology, you know, we are very innovative country, and we will come up with the technology. You know, the battery technology is changing. I don't think lithium-ion batteries will be the battery of the future, because I don't consider them a very high-quality battery product. There will be other batteries, one that don't self-combust, one that can hold charge, you know, longer, and so forth. But we want to make sure that whatever regulation we come up, that you guys come up with, that regulation can support what we as a water provider need to do for emergency response and sanitation.
Okay. Yeah, appreciate that. And then I guess I'll just toss in too, as everybody I'm sure is aware, but just in case you aren't, you know, here in California, we have a manufacturer requirement where they must sell zero emission vehicles as part of their sales starting with the 2024 model year. So that is another reason we think the availability will be clearly much better than it is today. But understand your concerns.
Okay. So next we have board member representing the San Joaquin Valley, Tanya Pacheco Warner. So I've unmuted you. If you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation begin. Oh, I see you put your hand down. Or you're still muted on your end if you are trying to speak. If not, then. Okay, still shows you're muted on your end, but we can go to the next commenter and sort this out in the meantime. Okay, so next I see Beverly Deshow. I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation and begin. Still shows you're muted on your end. So once we unmute someone from our side, the person who's being called on needs to unmute their own mic. I suppose we can come back to Beverly.
Yeah, and this is Craig. Just a reminder, in Zoom, there's a little microphone icon at the bottom left of your screen. You'll see that crossed out. If you're muted, you'll need to click that to unmute yourself.
Okay, we can come back to Beverly. So next I see Kevin Brown. So, okay, Kevin, I've unmuted. Oh wait, okay, I've unmuted you. If you could begin.
Hi, it's Kevin Brown, the Manufacturers Emission Control Association. Our members supply not just emission controls, which is what we're commonly known for, but our members also supply a range of battery technologies, components, electric drive components and systems. And I have a question and then a comment based upon what the answer to the question is. And my question is, what constitutes a dedicated snow removal truck or piece of equipment?
Well, this is Tony. So I'm going to actually pull up the definition, but my recollection is it's a vehicle that's either equipped with an auger or otherwise outfitted in a way that's not easily modified.
Okay, so looking at the regulatory text, it's a vehicle with a permanently affixed snow removal equipment, such as a snowblower or auger, is operated exclusively to remove snow from public or private roads and other paths to allow on-vehicle access. So it does
Okay.
need to have a permanently affixed equipment. It can't be easily removed or used for other
So
purposes.
it's important that this is really addressed well in the California program, because it'll be adopted by other states as well in the rest of the country that have a lot more winter and a lot more winter equipment to have to deal with. And the most common type of vehicle used for snow removal is a truck, which will be equipped come towards winter with a blade, and then have the body of the truck potentially replaced and have a salt dispensing or brine dispensing solution tank mounted onto the truck for the winter months. And come spring, they remove all the equipment again, and they'll put another truck body on it for another use for that truck for the summer. What I want to make sure that that's addressed, there is the duty cycle of a snowplow operating in very cold climates in multiple grades. But even more importantly is that all the systems on the truck that is dispensing salt or brine just get bathed in corrosive materials that, it's so important that an electric vehicle is addressed to actually withstand that. And very often my experience from the retrofit days was that trucks would get equipped in the summer months when there was no mention at all of the bodies going on the trucks to dispense salt and brine. And then the equipment would get bathed in it all winter long. And it just wasn't, built to address that kind of corrosive environment. So we just ask that you take that back and consider that. It's the function of the truck as well, how well it'll work. I'm not aware of any demonstrations anywhere in the continent, including Quebec, where there's an electric snow removal piece of equipment operating, other than something that's used for clearing your front stairs. In terms of big machines, I'm just not aware of any electric machine operating at this point in time. And I just want to highlight that the importance that they are designed, the trucks are designed specifically for a purpose, because often fleets will buy a truck that's just a conventional truck with maybe a stake body on the back, and then they'll outfit it themselves come winter to do snow removal. And that's when you could have all sorts of problems emerge with the electrics that are on board a vehicle that potentially just wasn't, they weren't designed to cope with that corrosive environment.
So I'm sorry, I have to clarify. I can interpret your comment two different ways. So right now the language is strictly the ones that are dedicated and aren't multi-use.
Yeah.
So the description of putting different bodies on would not be exempt. Are you suggesting they should be?
Correct. So that means that there's a lot of trucks that potentially would be purchased as trucks
Yeah.
and then outfitted with snow removal equipment for winter. And the design of those trucks would not have been to address the corrosive environment of dispensing salt or brine.
Okay.
Right, and that could raise havoc with all sorts of electric systems on the truck.
Okay, and if you have any information you can provide us on any areas of sensitivity there, because again, not familiar with an example of a truck right now, but we know for cars and so on, they're going to be operating on those same roads. They're not dispensing the brine per se, but they're driving on them. And as I understand it, it's a non-issue for electric vehicles.
You don't have the same issue with vehicles that are just using the road. It's the vehicles that are actually dispensing salt and brine, as well as the issue of, how well will perform an electric truck in the winter in grade conditions moving snow. I mean, their batteries just may not be designed to be able to address that duty cycle.
Okay, thank you. I at least understand the comment, so we can try to look into that more.
Thank you.
All right. Next I see Kat Laker, and after that, Giulia Rodriguez. So Kat, I've unmuted you. You could unmute yourself and give your affiliation and begin.
Hello, thank you. This is Kat Laker from Allison Transmission. Thanks for holding these workshops. I was wondering on the qualification that you can use NZEV if no ZEV is available. What exactly does that mean? Is that for the specific truck type if no ZEV is available? I think I'm just trying to get clarity on how you judge ZEV availability by truck type.
Somebody help me find the specific reference, but the principle, I'll describe the general concept and then get into the make sure I cover the details right. But in principle, I think we phrase the language in a manner to say, look, if you go out for bid for a truck, whatever it happens to be that you need, and there aren't at least 2 manufacturers that bid with a zero-emission truck for that application, then you could go ahead and make the purchases of NZEVs that are available for that application. So that's kind of how it's phrased. So yes, it would be based on the type of truck you need and its ultimate configuration if for some reason a manufacturer can't make it available.
Okay, and that's what the bid goes out, and then if 2 manufacturers respond. Okay.
Yeah, yes, the manufacturers will respond, and then if there are no responsive bids or aren't at least 2 for a zero-emission vehicle, then the NZEV could be purchased, and then the fleet would keep a copy of that, or the agency would keep a copy of that if ever asked by ARB for audit purposes.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kat. So next is Giulia Rodriguez. After that is David Rettler. So, okay, I've given Giulia permission to speak. If you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation and begin.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So this is actually Emma. I'm here for Juliana from GNA. So Emma France from GNA. We were just wondering if fleets can use vehicles purchased before the purchase requirement period towards the first year. So essentially, will there be any early action advantages to purchasing prior to the purchase requirement period?
Yes. And yeah, so the way we've structured the language is any purchases that you make prior to 2024 or prior to the required purchase if you have a later date. Those could count towards your purchase requirement. So in an example of I'm buying, I'll just say 10 vehicles in 2025 and I have the 50% requirement, then 5 would have to be zero emission. But if you already have 5 in your fleet because you purchased them 1 or 2 or 3 years before that date, you would be able to count those towards that purchase you meet the compliance requirement and you could at that point buy 10 conventional ones in that particular purchase.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And yeah, and just I'm kind of just making a comment back to the prior question, just because when we talk about NZEVs, what we're talking about are vehicles that have all electric mileage capability, because I know the term NZEV sometimes is used differently for different purposes. So just to make sure we're talking the same language, if a zero emission vehicle isn't available, then one that's zero emission capable, such as a plug-in hybrid, is an NZEV. That would be the next default purchase, if you will.
Okay, so next is David Rettler, and after that is Christian Corby. So David, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation and begin.
Good morning. My name is David Rettler. I represent the Municipal Equipment Maintenance Association as well as the City of Fairfield. I have a few things I wanted to clarify for the NZEV. So if a plug-in hybrid style vehicle is not available when the manufacturers submit a bid, what's the process then?
At this point in the regulation, I don't think there's anything that would specifically address the situation.
So an example would be, and it kind of leads into the definition of a manufacturer. So let's take a sewer truck. So you have a vacuum sewer truck, either there's several manufacturers, I'll say Aquatech, Vactor, Vacon. So if you have, you can buy it with a Freightliner, a Peterbilt, a Kenworth chassis. Is that the manufacturer, or is it when they send their chassis to Florida to say Vacon, and Vacon outfits it with the sewer truck equipment, and then it's delivered? When we bid that out, it's going to be bid out through one of those three manufacturers I mentioned. There are other manufacturers, but those are the three we consider. So let's say a Vacon. The Vacon bid comes in, and it does not have an electric Freightliner, Peterbilt, Kenworth chassis because it can't run the equipment, or it does have an electric driven chassis, but it has a Ford V10 or a diesel engine that runs all the auxiliary equipment. So who's the manufacturer? Is it Vacon, or is it one of the chassis manufacturers?
So David, that's a good question. Because right now, I don't know that the language really delineates that. I mean, basically our expectation would largely be, hey, if from Peterbilt you can get an all-electric chassis that you can put the body on, then that would cover it. And then you're describing, in addition to that, your example would be, hey, this is an instance of two-engine vehicle potentially. So if it has either an auxiliary engine built in, I mean, this is a two-engine as a diesel, for example, to begin with. So as an electric, you would say it could be an electric drive, but still a combustion auxiliary mechanism.
Yes, so it was one of the 39 exemptions we sent to you.
Okay.
That's just one example. There's lots of trucks out there like this. And then as far as the NZEV, so again, you in that classification of vehicle, you might be able to get an electric drive. However, Vacon may not bid an electric vehicle for the main drive chassis, because are they the manufacturer, or is it the Freightliner or Kenworth or Peterbilt? Because we're bidding, when we put out the bid, it's for a Vacon sewer truck. So when the bids are returned, it's for a Vacon, not necessarily the drive chassis.
Okay.
Then one comment I wanted to make is I've been working with several manufacturers, both like Ford, Kenworth, Green Power, and so forth. One of the challenges we're coming up with is the OEMs are not able to provide a chassis that accommodates specialty bodies. And this is true with all of those manufacturers I just mentioned. And the example would be for equipment that is hung on the outside of the frame rails. So if you're going to put a utility body for a, say, an F350 or an F250 or a 550 service body with a standard 38-inch compartment, that compartment has to, the bottom of that compartment has to be at the top of the frame rail so that the batteries and or ESS are not in the way, or you lose compartment space. So therefore, if you're a vertically challenged person, you try to reach the top of that 38-inch compartment, and instead of the bottom being normally about halfway up the rear wheel, normally about half the rear wheel is inside the fender of the utility body. If you now move that up to the top of the frame rail, the top of that 38-inch compartment is really tall. And then the lumber rack or the material rack that is normally on top of that is, you're going to need a step ladder to get any materials up on top of there.
So David, you're referring to a situation where, let's say, battery placement in the battery electric is on the outside of the frame rail, so the entire body needs to be different.
Yes, the body needs to be above the frame rail. And whether it's a controller or batteries that are outside the frame rail, there's a lot of equipment down at the ACT show in Long Beach. I looked at quite a few manufacturers, talked with many manufacturers, couldn't find any that had all of their equipment on the inside of the frame rail like you would find on a conventional gas or diesel light medium duty truck. Light, I mean F250 and above, I guess in your case, medium. So we're having a really hard time trying to figure out how to design these bodies so that ergonomically our employees here at the city or in other agencies are not going to have problems hauling material and or being able to access those compartments that they normally can access right now.
Okay.
So,
David, you included some of this in the comments you submitted?
I have not submitted the formal
Okay.
comments yet.
Okay, yeah. So any insight there would be great, because I know that we had some months ago looked into that question if it appeared that all or most manufacturers were using outside the frame rails for medium duty trucks, if you will. And it seemed like it was 50-50, but if you're finding that it's in most cases or the types that you need, to be interested in knowing which ones.
And there's a lot of utility bed, 250 and up trucks in the state. And then just the last thing I wanted to talk about real quick, there was a gentleman talking about snow removal equipment. I think a good example is you have a 6-wheel dump truck. I used to have a fleet of these. During the summer, they're used for asphalt repairs. So hauling asphalt, filling potholes and so forth. And then during the winter, you put in a attachment inside the dump body so that you can spread salt or brine or sand during the winter, and you hook up the snowplow to the front and use it during the winter for that purpose. So that might help you understand a little bit better what I think he was trying to convey. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, on that particular topic, so again, the language is clear. If you have a dump truck, that you put a snowplow on the front during the winter and use it just as a dump truck during the rest of the time, it wouldn't be listed under the exemption the way we've phrased it. So anybody who's potentially in that situation, we would need to get more information as to why and whether that would be an issue per se, given the technology.
And just real quick on the, I just noticed the dates, the timeline.
Mhm.
The board recommendation will be in the late summer or fall of next year.
Yes.
I know that's moved a few times. And my concern there is that it's pushing into the government budgets for the 23-24 fiscal year,
Mhm.
because those have to be approved prior to July 1 of 23. So while we need to take the time to get this language right, we do also need time to discuss with our agencies the budget requirements needed to put this in place prior to purchasing in 24, which is going to be part of the 23-24 budget year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, next is Christian Corby. After that, Jan Widdick. So Christian, I've given you permission to speak. If you can unmute yourself and give your affiliation and begin.
Yes, good morning. This is Christian Corby with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. So thank you, staff, for setting up these specialized meetings. This type of dialogue is really important. I've already been really impressed with a lot of the comments we've heard today. So really appreciate these additional dialogues. CalETC wants to voice its support for the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule. We know that without a strong Advanced Clean Fleet Rule to balance the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, neither is likely to succeed. So we really appreciate that staff is pushing forward with a strong rule. So there are certainly some challenges as we're hearing today, and we think that one concept that could help some of these concerns is to distinguish between large fleets and small and medium fleets in the public fleet rule, and allow the smaller fleets to have a little bit more flexibility and perhaps a longer timeline to electrify. We know that the smaller fleets have limited purchasing power and a limited ability to invest in infrastructure, and that those vehicles that they own are expected to serve their communities in a very broad capacity, including emergency response. So we're thinking that some different requirements for smaller fleets could go a long way in helping them transition. Also, allowing fleets within the public fleet rule to opt into the high priority fleet rule could be another way to improve electrification, as some of the larger public fleets might be interested in the other pathway. One other thing we'd like to recommend would be having a technology review that would be conducted by an independent panel and make a commercialization determination for specific truck classes. We think that this concept could really help some of the things that were voiced earlier by a commenter from the water districts about concerns around whether or not the technology is there. And we think an independent review process that would make this commercialization determination could really help eliminate some of the uncertainties around whether or not the truck technology can do all the things that these agencies need these trucks to do, including what the impact on a vehicle's range might be to run some ancillary functions, or also what the truck's capability can be to respond to emergencies. We know that this technology review panel was done for the light duties of mandate, and that it helped inform the requirements of that rule. And we think that it could be very useful in tying back to the Advanced Clean Truck Rule and informing the timelines and sales requirements there. So hopefully staff is willing to consider that concept, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts on that would be. And then just want to recognize the misalignment between the Class 2B3 trucks, and knowing how much of a significant portion they make up of the fleet on the road today, but not very many Class 2B3 trucks are owned by fleets. So there's just a bit of misalignment there in the rule, and we hope that that can be addressed. On exemptions, we know that the exemptions will be required in particular cases, and they should be transparent, narrowly defined, and include objective criteria so that they're easy to follow. We've also heard from many of our members that the 75% requirement already being ZEV is going to be very difficult to meet, and is likely not be able to work, especially for small fleets that have such few trucks. And then finally, we'd like staff to consider where an exemption is granted, requiring an electric power takeoff device be used to run the ancillary functions, so that while the truck may need to run on a combustion engine to get to where it's going, it can run off an electric PTO when it gets there to run its auxiliary functions. So thank you very much for your time today, and appreciate this dialogue.
Thank you, Christian. We appreciate the comments, and we'll take a look at that. And I guess on the panel to determine commercially available fleets, I think that's an idea we haven't heard before, so we can look into that. I think we might have to strike a balance between making sure that that it's clear enough to determine when an exemption will not be granted, and I think we'll have to work internally to see how to make that clear. But that is something that does seem we can definitely look into that further. All right, so next I see Janet Widdick, and after that, Joe Dalham. So Janet, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Janet Widdick with the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. And first, again, thank you guys for holding this work group. It is so important for us to be able to talk to all of you, but also to hear from each other. There's so much I'm learning from the other speakers, and in particular, the last one, Christian. I have to say I agree with, I think, all of his points, especially the one about some sort of independent body that can help guide commercialization determinations. I think we too share a lot of concerns and questions about how the exemption process would actually work, and I'll get into a little more detail on that. But I think my takeaway from this is I really want to encourage you guys to have a series of work group meetings. I would be saddened if this is the only one. And I think we can organize them around topics. I think especially being able to check in with all of you when you consider new concepts or want to make adjustments to the proposal, you're learning a lot from all of your discussions with fleets. And this is kind of a way that you can bring everybody along with you on this learning process, and that we can understand where the rule maybe needs more work or where we can add in specific comments. We can definitely provide suggestions in terms of topics, but like one whole topic could be how would we do commercialization determinations alongside what would exemption criteria look like? And I think a lot of us could bring ideas to bear on that one. So stepping back though, if we look at the exemption concept as currently proposed, I do have a question around how does the CARB approval process work alongside the fleet compliance reporting? So what I don't understand is, so if someone submits an application for an exemption and they think they've documented it and demonstrated the need, and you guys turn around and say, actually, no, we don't agree with you, we don't want to exempt this vehicle, that's going to throw off their annual compliance accounting. If they thought that they were going to get that exemption and you deny it, then they probably did not purchase enough and won't have enough time to make up that difference by the time they have to submit their compliance report to you. So if you guys can kind of like walk through that timing, and then I have a couple of other quicker questions on that.
I'll go ahead and start. In terms of the we kind of covered it. It's not really an exemption per se, but the language of, hey, if there aren't bids for ZEVs when you're making a purchase, and there are for the NZEVs, then that would be simply keep a copy of your bid request and the responses, and then upon audit we would verify. But that, I think that part is rather straightforward. When you're talking about the and to be clear, I mean, it is our intent with any exemption type language to make it very clear, so that the determination will be well understood or expected based on the merits of the actual situation. So our role would largely be, hey, you were supposed to provide this kind of information and you haven't, so provide it, and then you'll get the exemption, if you will, because the criteria has otherwise been met. However, in the emergency response exemption part, there is the aspect of making a demonstration that there isn't fueling infrastructure available where it would be needed. And so that one, there's a little more subjectivity to it, but that would be the criteria. To the extent that we can define that better, then that would be an improvement. But largely that would address situations where, hey, my vehicles, I have charging infrastructure for my battery electrics or a station for my hydrogen one, and I'm operating local, and I do some emergency support, but I stay local, then that would not be a justification for an exemption. But if it's, hey, I'm going out of state, or I'm having these trucks going to different counties on different timelines where there might not be any supporting infrastructure, then there would be a justification. So there's going to be some judgment there, but by and large, it should be fairly straightforward in most examples. But I don't know if we can make everything as crystal clear as possible, but that is our goal, to make it very, very clear what that criteria is.
Yeah, you might want to work with everybody to build out like a decision-making timeline, because as the fleets do their purchase planning, and then, you know, when would they need to get all the bids in and submit an application, have you guys review it, you know, approve the exemption, and then allow them to actually hit their annual compliance reporting online. So that's just one thing. It'll help everybody visualize, but it does feel like in certain situations, fleets are going to have a really hard time managing this on an annual basis to try to figure out, you know, can they get a bid? Where's the infrastructure? And then that was the whole question too. I had this idea about demonstrating infrastructure availability. I think we do need to work more on understanding how you are looking at this, because right now it's really hard for fleets to know where an emergency is going to happen. I mean, they can't, like, how do you predict an unknown like that? And then what would be the like burden of proof or standard of evidence that you guys are looking at in terms of whether or not the infrastructure is readily available? If they're just going to say, no, I give mutual aid all over the state and out of state, and then are they done? I somehow suspect you're not going to accept that.
No. And again, to the extent that we can specify some criteria, that's something that's already happening. So if there are mutual aid agreements in place, then that would be something we can just say, hey, provide that as proof of a mutual aid situation. But then the other part would be, hey, you do have the information on how you use your fleet and how many how many have to stay in the local area to continue to provide the services you provide, and only a portion of that fleet would potentially be dispatched to some other location, for instance. And I know that's going to vary by entity, but that's kind of the concept.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that there's room for like a very large conversation around the emergency exemption.
Yeah.
Flipping it around on the other side, the whole idea too about allowing out-of-state vehicles to come in and operate for 30 days during an emergency. I want you guys to think a little bit about that 30-day clock. It's a little bit arbitrary. And shouldn't it be they can operate for the duration of the emergency? I mean, doesn't that simplify it?
Yes. Yeah. So we'll definitely be looking at that language, because we do recognize that a 30-day window isn't going to be sufficient in several instances. And if those who aren't familiar, in some of our regulations, we do have some language that deal with emergency events, natural disasters, those kinds of things. And so there's language that has a time frame that isn't defined or limited to a 30-day window. So we'll be looking at how to cover that so that if vehicles need to be here for multiple months during an emergency event, or sometimes even longer than a year, that we'll be able to address those situations.
Okay, and then on the idea around the order cancellation, so if a fleet owner cancels the order, then they have to like deduct it from their compliance reporting. What do you see as happening if OEM, however, either has promised something they can't deliver, or are delayed, or basically has faulty equipment or a recall? What if the cancellation is beyond the control of the fleet? Can you give them some flexibility if it was actually a problem on the side of the OEM?
All right, yeah, we can look into that. So you're kind of referring to a situation where somebody might say, look, I needed to purchase 5 zero-emission vehicles and I bought some conventional ones. I would meet my 50%, but for some reason, that 5 ZEV order ends up getting canceled by the manufacturer or for some other.
Something happens, like the manufacturer promised something that they can't deliver, and the fleet's like, we can't use that vehicle. So I think, again, there's room there to have a conversation around how those the compliance reporting would actually work in a variety of different situations. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. We appreciate the comments. Okay. So next I see Joe Dalham, after that Jacob Burks. So Joe, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute and give your affiliation and begin.
Okay, great. This is Joe Dalham from Odine Systems. So Odine, we sell electrification systems for medium and heavy duty trucks. We're primarily focused on zero emission operation of equipment. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of trucks that have relatively low miles driven, but they have currently a lot of engine on time to provide power for, let's say, hydraulics for, bucket truck, digger derrick, could be a lot of different types of equipment for compressors, or even generators on board to export power. So we do that all electrically. We use a plug-in system. And the question is, some of these, like emergency support vehicles, appear like they need to travel and then arrive in an area that potentially doesn't have the grid operational and then provide support. Systems like ours would be able to electrify the operation of that equipment when it arrives. We've also done testing with the Department of Energy and found that even in extended circumstances, like if you don't have access to the grid, we're able to quickly recharge the battery system and turn the engine off. And with that type of very short engine operation, you still reduce greenhouse gases by 80% and NOx by 90%. That's actually in a public report that CARB paid for from NREL. My question is, will there be a requirement that chassis, for whatever reason, are not suitable for full electrification, that steps are taken to electrify the other portions of operation to still get a lot of the benefits that electric provides the vehicles? And especially on, let's say, if there are concerns about extended operation, that, systems that operate in this hybrid mode where very small amounts of fuel are used to recharge batteries and the engine turns off again, if that will be a requirement. Any discussion about that?
Well, I mean, that is not in the current proposal. And, wasn't something we included in the manufacturer requirement either. So I think that's just something we can take back and discuss internally.
Yeah, it might be a solution, for those that have to operate when the grid is down and still save fuel and reduce emissions. They would still operate as a plug-in in their, local regions. And then to address some of the other issues, the body typically isn't changed when you use this type of technology, so it still functions, may overcome some of that those issues about the ability of equipment to be, mounted in the same way as it would on a fully electric vehicle. And I guess the same thing with NZEV. Right now, it also includes electrification of driving, but something that electrifies stationary operation is also not currently an NZEV. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Yeah. So the focus is on the drivetrain and ultimately getting to full electrification.
Yeah.
So that's basically the approach. So because we did look at EPTOs in the past and chose not to put it in. So that's where we are at this time, but we can always discuss internally.
Yeah, I would recommend that it would be based upon the duty cycle of the vehicle as far as, which technology would be most appropriate to be an NZEV as far as driving versus, stationary fuel use. And that if you do a mandate or let's say require EPTOs, that they also include the fast recharge method that I'm talking about, so that once it's plugged in, it uses the energy. But if you have no access to a grid for 30 days, you can continue to reduce emissions through a fast recharge method.
Okay, yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, our expectation would be on some kind of work truck that if it is a NZEV, then there would not need to be a separate battery for the vehicle, for the auxiliary equipment, because presumably it would use the battery associated with the drive system.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so next I see Jacob Burks. After that, Elizabeth Schulk. Apologies if I mispronounced that. Jacob, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation to begin. We're not hearing anything on our end for speaking. It looks like you're unmuted though.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Better? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so Jacob Burks, manager of fleet operations here in Sacramento with SMUD. I just had a couple of questions. The language in the document refers to body type, and I'm trying to understand the thought processes between body type versus just using gross vehicle weight. Is there a reason why you guys are going more towards body type versus gross vehicle weight rating or vehicle class?
I'm sorry, I missed. There was that comment about the exemption language.
Yeah. And
Well,
throughout the regulation, I just see the body type referred to versus gross vehicle weight rating or the vehicle class.
Right. So yeah, So right now we're taking the approach of, hey, if you need a drill rig and that's the vehicle type that you need, or a cement mixer or something along those lines, that if you can get that in the configuration that you need, then that's where going to the NZEV version of that would work. So rather, because they could all be class 6 or 8 or whatever. So we've gotten other comments that kind of said, yeah, we should look at class and class alone and not the intended function of the vehicle. And so that would simplify things, but we're trying to find that right balance of saying, hey, yeah, there's class 6 chassis available as ZEVs, at some point in the future, both hydrogen and battery electric, for example. But if you can't put the body to meet the intended function on that chassis, then the body type is in essence what we kind of defaulted to using as the term to identify that situation.
Okay, because I know from like my standpoint, like I have 2-yard dump trucks and I have 10-yard dump trucks and everywhere kind of in between.
Yeah.
So I could see where, okay, I could electrify my smaller ones and put off my larger ones, or maybe something to that effect. But I also can look at it from the OEM perspective of eventually, Freightliner and Peterbilt and the OEs are going to have to actually build from the factory a dump truck in order to make it meet, XYZ modifications for it to be electrified. So I can see some different types of it, but from a fleet manager's perspective, it seems to make it a little bit more complicated. But my next question is, is kind of along the same comments that have been made, is if there are a suggestion, if there would be a third party kind of a technology validation process. And some of the comments on this call we're talking about, you know, if you put it out to bid and you do not get a bid for a ZEV vehicle or an electric vehicle, at that point, does that deem that it's not available just by going through that bidding process? Or it seems like there needs to be some way to validate what is good usable technology and what isn't, because I could see there being, you know, a million different arguments as to what constitutes, you know, good usable equipment and what doesn't, you know.
Yeah. So yeah, we are relying on the bid language, and so I'm not looking at the language directly. I have to remember the details. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But that the spirit of the intent here is that one, that the request for bids would be available to everyone. It wouldn't be just, hey, I'm only submitting it to 2 manufacturers, for example. And that there'd be some demonstration that there was either a publicly available bid broadly, or to the extent that somebody might go direct to the manufacturers rather than posting something online in that manner, then would it be at least contact each of the manufacturers associated with vehicle production as part of that criteria. So if the manufacturers aren't willing to stand or make the vehicle available or stand behind it, if you will, in its application, then that would be sufficient demonstration.
Okay. So, but kind of to play devil's advocate, if I put, you know, it has to be a 19,500 gross vehicle weight rated truck, fully loaded, and be able to do 400 miles between fuel stops. That pretty much, I don't know of anybody that's going to be able to accomplish that. So that would allow me to just go with the next best thing.
Yeah. So, and then that's where, unfortunately, there can be some subjectivity. It's like, okay, you asked for a 400-mile spec, but nothing in your fleet shows that your trucks ever do more than 150 miles. That would then present a disconnect. So yeah, again, we can look at, and then I'm going to suggest to others when you do submit comments, we would appreciate things like that so we avoid the subjectivity. It's like specifying a specific condition to then say, yeah, this is a genuine RFP as opposed to this is tailored so that it would exclude the ZEVs for somewhat more arbitrary reason.
Okay. And then the last question I have is, you know, 2024 is fairly soon, and I typically replace between 40 and 80 vehicles a year in 2024. Do you guys feel like the OEMs are going to be able to bring vehicles to market? You know, I know that I think they're mandated, is it 10% of what's on their cell lots is going to be a ZEV by 2024, 10% or something like that, I think.
I think it's 5 to 9% in the first year, depending on the category.
So do you think that to me, it kind of feels like maybe the OEMs their schedule to build is a little bit behind our schedule to replace. Of course, that's just me speaking. Other fleets may replace their fleet slower, different meeting. But I generally, for me, I have 1,000 vehicle fleet, and I try to keep the fleet age at about under 10 years. So I'm replacing 10% of the fleet a year theoretically, but
sure.
Across California, I don't think I'm really any different than any other municipality fleet. But I mean, you guys, to me, it just kind of feels like the OEMs are kind of the bottleneck, and that they're going to continue to be the bottleneck on this regulation unless this regulation is written more to align with the expectation for them.
Yeah, and keep in mind that just make sure we're talking the same language too. It's the manufacturers, it's 5 to 9% of their total California sales, and this specific fleet requirement, the entire package, public and the others, isn't going to cover every truck. It's going to be a little over half of the trucks in the state. And so, as was touched on earlier, largely the manufacturer sales and the fleet requirements are somewhat aligned in the early years. The lighter trucks, some of the fleets largely that we're targeting here don't typically have those lighter trucks, but we also see a lot of those sales going outside of the fleet purchases. So we think the manufacturers are going to make sales both in and out of fleet requirements. But then over time, the required purchases is expected to exceed what the manufacturer minimum requirement is. And we anticipate that some manufacturers are going to exceed their minimum requirement as well. And obviously a lot's changing over the next several years, given all the announcements and some of the direction that the manufacturers stated they're headed.
Okay.
But it's an early market, and we recognize that, but part of the purpose of the regulations on the manufacturer side and frankly on the fleet side is to provide that certainty so all the appropriate investments get made to make those possibilities happen in a smooth way, and the entire state's behind making this a reality and making a transition in as smooth way as possible.
Okay. Yeah, and then just again, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but I can't stress enough the importance of having some kind of a third party technology validation process. I think every municipal fleet manager probably in the state of California has had, a brand new electric vehicle that cost them 3 times as much and was parked at the dealership for months and months and months, and then eventually went to auction. And we've all been on the cutting edge, on the bleeding edge of some of this stuff. And I think it would be, prudent to have some kind of a validation process, especially if if that OEM is going to be, made available for some kind of a grant or HVIP funding or any kind of a kickback incentive for us to buy the vehicle. I think it should have to meet some kind of minimum standard qualifications and duty cycle.
Yeah, and for everybody's benefit, I mean, it's slightly different, but there is a certification procedure for zero-emission vehicles that will be required starting with the 2024 model year. It is optional up until that particular model year. So there will be some more consumer protection aspect to it and better information about the differences.
We would love to be able to write into our vehicle spec that, hey, this has to meet this certification level, for it to be able to be able to bid.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
nice
to be clear, that requirement that starts in 2024 is a requirement on the manufacturers already for anything sold in the state that's a zero-emission vehicle. So it'll be covered by the regulation.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Next, we have Elizabeth, and after that, Steve Poncelet. So, Elizabeth, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation and begin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, this is Elizabeth Schultz with CalSTART, and I just wanted to leave a comment that CalSTART recommends a simple extension of the proposed classes under the regulation, just to make it more impactful while adding minimal incremental work. We believe the regulation should include Class 2A pickups under this public fleet section, as many of the battery electric pickups are heavier than the weight rating of 8,500 pounds under the current scope and applicability. The small change would apply to the same fleets. These vehicles are available now to meet their needs and would help build the market for vehicles that manufacturers are bringing to market now. CalSTART has seen strong support for the inclusion of Class 2A pickups under this regulation from some of our other environmental organizations, and we think it would be an appropriate step to add them to this section of the regulation. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Steve Poncelet. After that, Josh Hylinski. So, Steve, you should have permission to unmute yourself. Can you give your affiliation and begin?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Stephen Poncelet. I'm with Truckee Donner Public Utility District. We are a not-for-profit, community-owned public electric and water utility serving the greater Truckee area in the Sierra Nevadas. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and I like your format of little presentations and lots of interactions because I think it does get to the core of some of the issues. We support the goals and objectives that CARB's trying to achieve. However, we have some real technology and practical limitations that get in the way. As a supplier of electricity and water, we have 14,000 customers, roughly, 70 total employees. A couple high-level comments about the snow removal. We multi-purpose our fleet because we have to. And we have very big winter months, 200 inches of snow a year. And so we can't do emergency response, public health and safety. We can't keep the lights and the water on without snow removal. So we do have attachments that get put on trucks that do other things in the summer, like the other utilities have talked about. Big snow blowers we have to use that get put on the front of a loader, for example. It's not just dump trucks, it's loaders, it's the whole fleet of vehicles. And so there are practical considerations. We also operate in a mountainous environment above 6,000 feet in altitude. So 4-wheel drive, heavy duty, and we require, in a blizzard, 6 foot of snow over 2 days, a truck will leave and they may only go 3 miles, but they may stay there for 2 days. And so the concepts of shore power and the ability to provide the power that we need at the job site to do the work, along with the issues of payload. Because electric vehicles are heavy. You get into our heavy duty, 4-wheel drive line trucks, with a bucket and a line and, everything else that it does. We might need to bring poles or bring this or whatever it is. Electric, the weight of batteries will reduce the payload that we can take on our trucks, which means more trips. And then just the lower performance means that, we'll need, and we will provide comments with details, but we will need to upsize our fleet by tens of % just to be able to do the job we're doing today in the environment that we face. And yes, we have mutual aid agreements with, all the California utilities. We also are a member of the Utah Municipal Associated Power Systems, UAMPS in the Intermountain West, and we have mutual aid with them. And so for a utility in a high Sierra environment, the technology poses some significant challenges. So, like everyone else, I'm talking about the ability to do emergency response and support our community's efforts for public health and safety. Electric and water utilities are not exempt under CVC 165, I believe. I don't quite get it, why that isn't the case, because, in an emergency, restoring water and power, if, whether it's a hurricane, my case can be a blizzard that goes for a week and, takes out the territory and you can't really move for days and people are just digging out. Southern California could have a earthquake. And, LADWP doesn't have mountains, but they could be without power for a week. And then you throw in the advent of wildfire safety outages with PG&E's PSPS history. TDPUD is now subject to transmission level outages from our supplier, NV Energy. So even if we do everything, and as an electric utility, it's hard for me to say this, but I can't guarantee power. And I see situations where we will be out of power for 3-4 days because of wildfire outages. And so how do you respond in an emergency in that environment? So it's really an issue of how do we comply with the technologies that are available to us. And I can tell you at the fleet level, we can do it, right? For the stuff we're driving around for our employees. You get into F-150s, maybe, not in all cases, but some of our fleet, because it's not all critical. But as soon as you get over that and you start talking OEM customized chassis and payloads and the ability to operate in the field for, hours or days, and then you get into the big trucks and, we have our vac machines on the water side where, we're sucking water out of holes to be able to do our job. So those large vehicles, I don't really see the technology available today, and the performance, is a challenge. So we're eager to work with you. We'll share that information. The 75%, that's just on our fleets at the lowest level, our SUVs or our commute cars, fine, and you could go further than that. But as soon as you get any higher, that exemption will be a challenge. And, what to do about CVC 165, I'm not sure, but part of me thinks there should be legislation, and I bet you get a whole bunch of people to jump on, and I don't want to create a mob, but I think there are legitimate industries like electric and water out there that are not considered emergency response, and it's inappropriate. And then we are using renewable biodiesel in our heavy duty fleets, and we've achieved a GHG reduction in doing that. And we did that in partnership with other local agencies in the town of Truckee. So when you go into the NZEV world, particularly for the bigger fleets and the heavy duty vehicles, I'm not sure renewable natural gas, renewable biodiesel, some form of alt fuel shouldn't be considered as part of the exemption. And I appreciate your listening to the comments.
Thank you for the feedback, Stephen. Appreciate all the different topics you covered there. We'll be looking into those.
And with that, yeah, we appreciate any of the information that you can provide about your fleet operation that you kind of touched on when you do submit comments. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Josh Hylinski. After that, David Rothbard. So Josh, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute and give your affiliation and begin.
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Josh Hylinski. I'm the fleet manager for Nevada County Fleet Services up in Grass Valley, California. Thanks for having this work group and accepting comments and concerns. Stephen really touched on pretty much a lot of my comments that I was going to make. Mine is basically touching on the snow removal trucks. A lot of our snow removal trucks we consider light duty, but under the new rule, the 8,500 pound GVW are going to be considered heavy and fall under the rule of replacement. So these trucks, they have about 6 months out of the year or a little less sometimes have snow plows fixed to the front, but they don't fall under the exemption on the CVC 165. And I was wondering if there's going to be any consideration in that because these can be almost considered emergency vehicles as well, because if the public roads aren't plowed and kept clear, first responders can't make it down those roads. Other municipalities, electrical and water districts can't get to their infrastructure as well. And a lot of these vehicles are take-home vehicles. So during the wintertime, people are bringing these back to their houses. And since our county is so spread out, they're bringing them out to their houses home at night to respond to emergencies, which aren't declared emergency response under CVC 165, like tree removal across roads, flooding, rock slides, that kind of stuff. So I was wondering if there's going to be any thought into that, maybe kind of like there is for the off-road regulation where they have it for the ag vehicles. If they're used 50% or more of their time, then they're considered emergency use or considered permanent snow removal.
Okay. Well, yeah, and so this is Tony. So I want to make sure we don't mix the two issues. So the vehicle code 165 is emergency vehicle, and so we pointed at that as an area where we're not going to cover in this rule. Okay. In terms of the snow removal language, that's something we put together in there. And so, so we're looking at any modifications that we think would be necessary in our reg language as part of the discussion here. So to the extent that you can provide us with some of the information about those operations, it would be helpful for us to understand the question. And I'll just say for everybody, I mean, we're looking here at a time horizon that's a fairly extended time horizon. Yes, we do recognize 2024 is not that far away, but when we're talking about a substantial part of the fleet being zero emission, or a major part of the fleet being zero emission, we're talking the 2030 timeframe, 2035 timeframe, depending on what your normal purchase pattern happens to be. And so part of the process and what we need to think about, and I'd like you to think about as well, is if we're talking about vehicle performance and capabilities in the 2030 timeframe versus today, that's going to be a different picture. And so we're trying to factor in to our thinking too, is, hey, how do you put a schedule together that largely aligns that, put some clear benchmarks out there, manufacturer requirements, and sales will be increasing over time. And as many of you may know, if you're talking about the lighter end vehicles, there's a fair number of pickups coming to market, if you will, 6 or 7, in the matter of the next year and a half or 2 years, and many of them with, independent wheel, 4-wheel drive or in different combinations. So there's a number of things coming to market. And so understanding your operation, what the manufacturers have already announced, for example, and to the extent we can get better information as to what their future plans are, would be helpful. And I think to an extent, some of this will also be used by the manufacturers themselves to say, hey, where are those, what are those needs? Because then, we're going to have to compete for those sales.
Okay.
As well.
And then I had another, a few things to add on to that. So earlier in the year, we did the large entity fleet reporting, and like Stephen had brought up, some of these vehicles don't travel very many miles a year, but they're in a small area, and engine hours are a big part in that. So maybe if the reporting would include engine hours compared to mileage, because some of these vehicles may only travel 100 miles in a day, but they're ran 24-hour shifts. So those trucks come back in, shift change, next crews get in those exact same trucks and go out and drive them. So there's zero to minimal time to be plugged back in if they were zero emission.
Okay. Yeah, and an example like that, to the extent you're submitting comments, is if you could identify some of the way you operate the vehicles now, that'll help us better understand some of the rationale behind your comments. And then frankly, we can always follow up with somebody. It's like, hey, you said XYZ, didn't get this or whatever. Let me understand the situation.
And I'll submit that in the comments as well. And I just had one more quick thing, back to the exemption for the no ZEV availability for going out to bid. So, going out to bid, if we have in our specs, certain vehicle manufacturers are reliable and known reliable. There's top 4 manufacturers that most municipalities or most people go with. And I know there is some startups for the heavy duty stuff like that. And on the county level, it's a big investment. When we purchase these vehicles, we're planning on keeping them for 10, 12 years. So I'd hate to be a guinea pig for a new startup that's zero emission, and then have issues with it in year 2 or year 3, and then we're in it for the long haul, or we have to auction it and take a huge loss. So I was wondering if in the consideration for the exemptions, if you built into your specs to go out to bid, if you can have, say, Kenworth, Peterbilt, Freightliner, International built into those specs to where you can get one of the big manufacturers.
Yeah, that's a balancing act there. To a degree, we don't want to exclude perfectly legitimate manufacturers just because they aren't some of the major ones, but I do understand the concern too. But broadly, we would, well, the way we written the language, we didn't put anything there that says you can exclude a number of manufacturers because of some other criteria as a basis for the exemption. If you want to go out for bid and only get those bids and they supply the trucks, then that's obviously your own decision. But if they're not available there, but they're available elsewhere, then right now we wouldn't use that as a criteria to say the exemption is justified.
Yeah, and I get it. That leaves a lot of room open. But all right, well, thanks for taking my comments. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Okay, next is David Rothbard. I've given you permission to speak. After that is Eric Neandros.
Thank you. This is David Rothbard, and I'm representing the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works, which is a lot of wastewater treatment plants. And just before I get into some comments on the proposed language, just wanted to say our sector, as long as people flush their toilets, we're going to have to treat that waste, and we're going to generate biogas. It's a non-fossil fuel, not a fossil fuel that has to be utilized. And this regulation is really the home for it, and it's not being included. We really would like to see the NZEV definition changed to allow this non-fossil fuel to be used, not as, you know, a battery hybrid per se. And that kind of gets into my comments of the overall structure here is we need equipment that's going to be reliable. We're essential public service. You don't want sewage in the street. So we need, like, you know, police and fire. We need equipment that's going to work when it needs to work. And having something like our biogas being able to be fueled in these vehicles would provide that reliability. So that's an offer we've been making. And I think that would be nice to have that should change for non-fossil fuel, and it'll certainly improve air quality. But that's bigger picture. But as far as this rule language, I have some questions about the exemption, especially for water, wastewater services. The way it's drafted, at least the way I read it, if I'm doing enforcement, A1 says if the following conditions are met, including more than 75% of the body type in the fleet are already ZEVs, how can I get an exemption if I don't have any other vehicles in the fleet yet? It seems like that excludes any exemptions till I already have 75% that are already ZEVs. Does that make sense? Because I'm reading this, I'm not following how.
But that is the concept. Let's just use 100 as the number. You're talking some dump trucks or something like that, or water trucks are you're going to be using. Then yeah, it's once you're at 3/4 of the water trucks are zero emission, then you can provide the justification of, hey, I need the rest to still be combustion because I don't have the way to be able to operate them for these mutual aid situations.
Exactly the problem I'm trying to highlight is I can't get that many because they're not going to serve the purpose I need for essential public service. So either we need to be exempted completely or have something that's achievable, because that's not an achievable exemption. We need something that'll allow us to do our work. And I do want to say our sector is fine with electrification. We support that as long as it lets us do our job. And that's our concern is if you're going to do this, let's make sure we can provide the service the public needs, and the exemption provisions at minimum have to let us do our job. And the other element other than A1, the other one I'm scratching my head on is the last statement as far as the executive officer will grant an extension if no more than 25% of the total vehicles would be using extensions. Well, if there are no trucks that would allow me to do my job, this also doesn't let me proceed with an exemption. So these are very narrowly written. I understand where you're trying to go with it, but if you could look at the exemption and make sure that people that have to do an essential public service can do it, or have something more flexible. You know, we can't predict the future. Maybe this will roll out so electric vehicles will be charged instantly and it'll work great. But at the moment, we don't have that flexibility. So having an exemption that allows the flexibility moving forward would be greatly appreciated.
And David, again, similar to others, it's like the premise here of the concern has to be is hey, the vehicles won't meet your needs. And so the better we understand what that situation is, the better we can understand, you know, anything we might need to discuss and or frankly get feedback from manufacturers and some others out too.
I think that's fair, but one thing I do want to highlight is, you know, I live in South Coast. They have very, very restrictive rules. They have a rule just like this saying you cannot have diesel vehicles, you have to use clean fuels. And when we do that, the gatekeeper is essentially saying, we don't believe that you can't get a clean fuel vehicle. And it's very challenging to be able to get through that gatekeeper. And again, to have some way of providing essential public service, this rule has to have the ability for people to get the equipment they need when they need it. If you have too many roadblocks, it's going to cause a problem. I mean, we could talk to you offline about that, but I really do encourage you to have something that's flexible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, next we have Eric Neandros. After that, Nicole Rice. So Eric, I've given you permission to unmute. If you give your affiliation and begin.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Eric Neandros with Gladstein Neandros Associates. We're a consulting firm that we do a lot of work in the alt fuel heavy duty commercial vehicle space, and we've been very, very successful over the last several decades helping to put probably more heavy duty natural gas vehicles on the road than pretty much any other firm out there. Contrary to a commenter in the last workshop who recommended that CARB just discard my comments because my payday comes from the NGV industry. I just want to clarify, these days, our business is probably 90% or more focused on heavy duty electric vehicles. And I think we're, again, doing a ton to really help advance that industry with OEMs and fleets and electric utilities, charging companies, and many others. So we're very, very invested in the heavy duty ZEV market for sure. One of the things that we do is technical feasibility assessments. We're actually working on an update for the ports of LA Long Beach right now, update to the first ones that were published in 2018, 2019. So I definitely agree with the commenters that said a tool like that would be helpful, and be happy to share whatever we can on our experiences there. If anyone's interested, you can actually Google Port of LA, probably clean truck assessment, and you'll find the last ones that we did, just as a good baseline. And that uses the DOE TRL levels as sort of the process by which we work towards technical feasibility. But for today, I just have a couple of clarifications that I wanted to confirm. Then I have a question. And this really kind of gets to some of the comments earlier around the bids and exemptions and snowplows and different types of specialty equipment and all those sorts of things. So in the event that no vehicle is available, then a near zero is an acceptable compliance path. I believe that's been confirmed a few times. One of the things that hasn't been said is that, and this was asked a couple of times in the last workshop and confirmed by ARB, that currently there are no certified near zero emission trucks available by CARB or available for sale. So I just wanted to make sure that that's still correct.
There's some demonstrations, but that's all. That's fine.
Yeah, and we're working on a few, and hopefully we can get them to the market sooner rather than later. But as of today, that technology doesn't exist. So under the exemption process, a near zero would be allowed, but it doesn't exist, so you can't buy it. So the default would, I guess, be a diesel. But I want to confirm that the CARB is still thinking the historical definition of near zero has been a natural gas, a low NOx natural gas, which has been funded under HVIP. And once it's funded under HVIP in some of the most recent programs, it does require the use of in-state RNG. So there was a process to allow for that. And in the last couple of quarters of the LCFS program, CARB has confirmed that all of the compressed natural gas from renewable sources is carbon negative. So all our CNG is carbon negative in California. That's being reported in the LCFS, which is not 100%, but close to it, of all the fuel. And we think that carbon intensity level will continue to decrease as more lower carbon intensity sources of RNG come online. But I want to confirm that under the Advanced Clean Fleet, a natural gas low NOx running on carbon negative RNG would not be considered an acceptable near zero compliance technology in the event that there was no zero available. Is that still correct?
That is correct. It's not in this proposal. And again, as you described, the LCFS regulation is the fuels policy that is successfully getting more of our fuel to be from renewable sources, and those emissions and the benefits of that are reflected in that policy and in that regulation.
So I guess my question is ultimately, if we have the opportunity to put carbon negative trucks on the road sooner versus just regular diesel, what's the rationale for not allowing that as a potential compliance technology in the event there's no zero available?
Yeah, so there's a number of issues to cover there in terms of how we handle the exemptions, but by and large, we expect that zero emission vehicles to be an option for most applications. This is a 20-year transition period here in many cases that we're talking about. So it's a long-term plan. And
I get that, but I see this really as more of the short-term, near-term, where we don't have zero emission for all applications. We have a huge amount of product and technology that can run carbon negative renewable natural gas.
I know, but when you're saying carbon negative, it's still part of the entire transportation pool. The LCFS set requirements that would reduce the carbon intensity of our transportation fuels by the maximum feasible amount that the board determined at the time. So that's already in place and happening. And as everybody probably is aware, the engine standards here in California are going to be much, much cleaner come 2024. And that's a regulation that's already been approved by the board, it's just being finalized. And then there's other steps to make sure that in-use emissions are going to be as clean as possible so that the malfunctions and other things that happen get repaired as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
so
but I just want to stay on the
part of the
GHG
overall
piece.
No, I understand, but this is part of the entire overall plan and the state strategy, and we're trying to achieve a number of goals. The governor's executive order, carbon neutrality goals by 2045, meeting the ZEV requirements, and this part is strictly about the ZEV part of the strategy. And so to put in combustion strategies in a ZEV rule is as duplicative, if anything, and not necessary to do it in every single.
I guess I disagree with the necessary, given the need to focus on short-lived climate pollutants, and ultimately you kind of filter through the exemption process, and you end up with.
That's
I can
fine.
buy
We're not going to be on the same page because we're basically saying we're doing everything that you're saying. You're just not in this particular rule.
I just want to clarify though that we get down to that sort of final decision, and I can buy a renewable natural gas with carbon negative fuel, but that's not going to help me comply. So I'm just going to buy a regular diesel, which has no low carbon requirements on the fuel. That diesel would be acceptable.
To make sure we're on the same page.
But this doesn't make sense to me. That's all.
I understand. No, but to make sure that right now the language that we have that we're discussing doesn't say go buy a diesel. It says you don't make the purchase. Wait till next year, potentially look to it next year for that purchase or something along those lines.
So even worse, you keep running an old diesel that has higher emissions, and again, no low carbon fuel requirement to it. So it just seems like a missed opportunity given the climate crisis that we have and the need to reduce diesel emissions in disadvantaged communities. It just doesn't add up. I get it though, that you guys have your position.
No, Eric, I understand. And I mean, we'll take that comment under consideration and look at what the strategy should be. But by and large, we foresee that most of these vehicles are going to be available and meet the needs. Although we understand there's going to be the potential for some situations where it might not. And so we'll look into
these vehicles are available too, because as the last commenter said, it's good for my payday. So I'm all thumbs up on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Eric. Next we have Nicole Rice, and after that, Sarah Deslauriers. Apologies if I mispronounced that. Nicole, give your affiliation and begin.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Nicole Rice, California Natural Gas Vehicle Coalition. Actually, the previous two speakers hit on a lot of points that I was going to raise, so I won't belabor a lot of those. First of all, I did want to just say that I am glad that you all are having this conversation. Appreciate this opportunity. I think it's been a good conversation this morning, and I'm looking forward to the future ones that were mentioned by Craig for later on regarding this rule. Also want to say that the comments that have been made about doing a tech review through an independent panel to determine commercialization for these vehicles is a very interesting idea. I hope that staff takes that back and looks seriously at doing something like that. It needs to be truly independent so we can get good information, because I think that will answer a lot of the questions that people have. However, even though we might be doing that determination, the question is, what are we going to do if that information demonstrates that some vehicles are not going to be available, either because they're not available in that class or they're not available to meet the duty cycle, as other speakers have talked about. So that is still an open question that needs to be addressed in this regulation. So I wanted to just make sure that I'm clear as to what happens if a fleet owner puts out a bid for a ZEV vehicle or a plug-in hybrid vehicle and nothing is available. What is it that staff anticipates or expects to occur in that scenario for the fleet?
Yeah, as the language is currently written, there would be no other option other than not make the purchase and look for another bid later.
Okay, so So I do think that is problematic for a planning perspective, because the determination of the vehicle not being available might not be a year to year kind of scenario. It might take some time before that vehicle could be available. So I do think it is a lost opportunity, as the previous speaker just stated, to not allow for clean technology to be part of this transition. ZEV very may well be our long-term strategy, and that is certainly a place where the state is going. As Californians, we all agree with that. However, there is a near-term opportunity here to achieve some emission reductions, to address our climate crisis, and to really try to get the diesel trucks off the road and replaced with something else. And so alternative clean transportation fuels like RNG powered low NOx trucks, but also other alternative fuels that are out there as well, like hydrogen and propane, not even mentioned in the regulation. So I do think that is a missed opportunity. I would like to see more flexibility for cleaner technology or cleaner transportation fuels in the regulation, and the exemptions to be flexible, not just applying to emergency situations where you have a significant portion of your fleet equipment that's already zero emission vehicles, but where you can actually start incentivizing people to make cleaner choices in their transportation and truck purchases. And then I guess the last thing I would say has to do with the feasibility component in the governor's executive order, where we would be transitioning heavy and medium duty trucks to zero emission vehicles where feasible. And I think that has been the overarching theme of this morning's comments, which is feasibility. And so given that directive from the governor's office, again, back to my original point, we strongly believe that there should be some flexibility to accommodate that feasibility. So if it's not available, then fleet owners don't have to hold off their purchases or have to purchase or continue to use trucks that are not the cleanest available technology for today. So we encourage a near-term strategy to be part of the thinking in this long-term objective, and to really keep that feasibility piece that's been instructed to us from the governor in mind when designing this regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Sarah, and after that, Frank Harris. So, okay, so give your affiliation and begin, Sarah.
Thank you. Sarah Delorier with the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, representing over 125 municipal wastewater treatment plants across the state. And I serve as their climate change program manager and representing the members on these types of issues. And I could build on, and I am going to be building on many of the comments that are already been stated today. One, just thanking you for this opportunity to keep engaged on this issue and to talk about some very specific issues for the wastewater sector. We do live in a space, of course, we're helping to support that overall approach to carbon neutrality. And so in that vein, and given the wastewater sector's position to be able to support multiple programs, we do have kind of a unique position we're in the context of this regulation. We'll start with, the short-lived climate pollutant reduction strategy. We've talked about this before, but it's, been getting its feet going and under implementation, or about to be going into implementation, and the wastewater sector is a key element of that implementation process, representing, this where all food waste could essentially be diverted from that's going to landfills to the wastewater treatment plants across the state, co-digesting it with our existing digesters, which do treat over 90% of the flow of wastewater right now. So we have this ability to use existing infrastructure and meet or help meet the goals for the short-lived climate pollutant reduction strategy by receiving that diverted organic waste. So as David mentioned, while we're trying to keep our toilets flushing and the sinks from clogging and all that, we are looking at also receiving and playing a role in reducing overall methane from landfills, and then producing biogas to be used in some form, because we're going to be producing that in perpetuity just by receiving or what you flush. And we want to use that beneficially as part of the short-lived climate pollutant reduction strategy. It did do an economic analysis. It did look at low carbon fuel as being the highest best use for that biogas. And so folks in that vein and preparing to help the sector push or implement short-lived climate pollutant reduction have already made investments in, receiving facilities for the organic waste and being ready to process or condition that biogas for use as a low carbon fuel, and even getting bids for trucks that are coming to say even take the either bring the food waste or take biosolids that are a product for use as CNG vehicles. And that's worked. They've looked into the bids of electric vehicles that just aren't available yet. And that is the same case for these emergency response vehicles or critical response vehicles that the wastewater sector has for, servicing our service areas, all communities, anywhere, remote or close by, urban centers. And those vehicles need to be able to travel long distances or do the power, have the ability to power a pump station and whatnot, and that those vehicles aren't ready, and electrified vehicles aren't ready to do or perform those as well. And so we're looking at that. And then in some cases, when we do see that these electrified vehicles are being, or say in the process of being produced, it's been mentioned time and time again about cost, but we also have to consider under the government kind of accounting standards for public agencies who are publicly funded, what that planning horizon looks like for, adjusting rates to accommodate for these types of expenses. So that could be considered as far as the timeline of this, and we'll provide comments specific to these scenarios that I'm mentioning. And so we do have not only folks investing for the climate pollutant reduction strategy or short-lived climate pollutant reduction strategy, but also to meet South Coast AQMD's Rule 1196 to be able to reduce their NOx and such emissions by a certain time period, 2023 and then 2031 for different levels there. And of course, as folks have mentioned, looking at vehicle or sources of NOx through vehicle emissions that could really help to reduce that or achieve that goal in a more effective fashion through using CNG vehicles has been one, say 90% reduction of NOx through that pathway. And so we see that there's some considerations here on that front, but also, as others have mentioned, our vehicles serve, we're part of CalWARN, which is the California Water and Wastewater Agency Response Network. And so even where you have mutual aid agreements that are for anywhere from, PPE for COVID to vehicle sharing. And I think there was a speaker before that was very eloquent from Rancho that spoke to how, some of our vehicles need to go across the state to be used to response or provide critical response to emergencies in all communities. And so we have those kinds of considerations that we'll detail in our comment letter as well. But to not be too redundant with other folks, we do see a space for NZEV in this for wastewater sector in particular, because of these different areas that we need or are addressing as part of the overall carbon neutrality target and achieving that. And also while meeting the main objective is water quality and trying to still maintain our meeting our water quality objectives and our ability to respond to natural hazards and disasters, and continuing providing an essential public service to the communities we serve. So that was a mouthful. It's like a fire hose, but we have details we'll provide, and just really want to get that out for you. If there's any questions, happy to answer.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And yeah, it is ultimately our goal to make sure that this is a smooth transition and everybody can continue to provide the critical services they provide as part of this, but also to provide some certainty as to where the endpoints are and frankly the path to get there. And I think everybody kind of working towards the same goal is going to make us more likely to meet that as well. But
Yeah.
appreciate that, and any details you can follow up with later would be very helpful.
Definitely, will do. We're just fear that we might threaten the ability to achieve the target of the short-lived climate pollutant reduction strategy if we're not able to use our biogas. So that's something we'll highlight too, but thank you.
No, yeah, and then on that vein, just for everybody's benefit, I mean, so clearly there's in parallel, there's efforts on both on the various fronts at ARB in particular, but the short-lived climate pollutant strategy, the scoping plan, which is looking at, hey, where is the best strategy for all sources, not just transportation, what technologies and what options there are to meet those goals, and the overall state plan is influenced greatly by the scoping plan work. And so we are aware of some of the overlap, and ultimately what we decide here is going to be something we do as part of an overall state strategy, and not just looking at transportation by itself. And so it's more of a systems issue here on how to put all the pieces together.
Yes, complicated system, but a fun challenge. So thanks again, and we'll be in contact, and we're talking with other folks and staff on these other programs as well. So we're trying to have an interagency meeting. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Next, we have Frank Harris, and after that, Steve Jepson. So let's give a note that we have about an hour left, and we have, looks like about 14 or 15 hands up. So if we stick to the about 3 minutes per comment, I think we'll be able to get through everyone. So just something we're trying to keep track of moving forward. Okay, so Frank, give your affiliation and begin.
Good morning. Thank you very much. This is Frank Harris with the California Municipal Utilities Association. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. And I wanted to talk about 3 main issues. CMUA submitted comments, and we'll probably submit some follow-up comments to this meeting as well. But I want to talk about three main issues. First, on process, thank you for recording this. Many of my members can't necessarily make the specific time of some of these events. And so they do go back and review the recording. So I appreciate it being recorded. And I noticed that a few days back, you sent out the answers to all the chat questions from the September 9th workshop. That was great. Thank you very much for doing that. I don't know if I haven't seen anybody asking any questions on chat today, but that's a really helpful process as well. I want to talk about 2 quick things. Like I said, we did submit written comments. First of all, on small fleets, I think this is something that we really need to collaborate on, both in terms of the purchase requirement and in terms of an emergency response exemption. There are just some unique characteristics and to small fleets. A few of the people have already talked about this earlier today, but essentially in a small fleet, they're required to serve in a much more broad capacity. We've talked about doubling up with snow plows on the front of bucket trucks. You just have to wear a lot of hats in a small fleet. And I recognize that the current regulation lifts the 50% purchase requirement for certain counties. But still in 2027, the 100% is still there. And so reflecting on the fact that small fleets face a different challenge, I'd like to be able to talk more about that down the road to make sure that CARB develops a rule that will work for the small, medium, and larger fleets. And then that gets up to my second comment. And here we're talking, again, you've heard many of my members have already spoken, or representatives of my members have already spoken. And what you've heard, I hope, is in the interest of making this work. We have, I serve both electric and water, publicly owned electric utilities and public water agencies. Our members are in a unique position in that they are infrastructure builders, clean fuel providers, emergency responders, and fleet owners and operators. I think this puts us in a unique position in terms of how we experience this regulation, and our interest overwhelmingly is to make sure that the regulation works. You've heard a lot of concern, and we've expressed concern about product availability, both in terms of technical availability, and then once the products are produced with the necessary needed upfit capabilities, actual market availability, vehicles being produced and being distributed. To my way of thinking, CARB has already addressed this. I know that Christian spoke about this. A few others have spoken on this. CARB sort of addressed this fairly well many, many years ago, 25 years ago. My gosh, I'm getting old. In the ZEV mandate with the battery technology review panel. And the report from that panel, I think if I remember, that panel put out reports every other year. And those reports were used to establish the requirements of the regulation at the time. I think a very similar panel can be put in place here that would provide reports. I wouldn't suggest every other year. I would think we need more frequent feedback on that, so that that would look at the actual supply of vehicles that can do the job sort of on a one-for-one basis. I don't think CARB really wants to develop a regulation that will cause certain fleet operators to have to buy more than one vehicle for what one vehicle did in the past. I mean, I can't imagine CARB is interested in that. So that sort of thing where you're looking at that technical capability, it reduces risk for CARB, it reduces the risk of non-performance for the regulation. And if it, the way I'm thinking about it, I put it very broadly at a high level in our recent comments. I'm pretty sure we're going to bake it out a little bit more for our next set. The way I'm thinking about this still sends a very clear message to manufacturers that as soon as the vehicles are produced, you're going to have a market. So it doesn't really harm that message at all, but it does address some of the risk that you're hearing from some of the owners and operators here. So I hope we get to talk about that more often. I know that we've got a lot of people online, so I'll wrap it up here. As I said, we'll probably put some more meat on that suggestion in our next round of comments, and you know, happy to answer any questions or talk further if you like.
We look forward to getting those comments in writing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So that was Frank. Next we have Steve Jepson, and after that, Austin Avery. So Steve, I've given you permission to speak. If you could unmute and give your name and affiliation.
Hi, thank you. This is Steve Jepson. I'm the Executive Director for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. We represent over 80 public water and wastewater and recycled water agencies in Southern California. I want to echo the comments from my colleagues, David Rothbart and Sarah Delorier with CASA. I want to talk a little bit about our specialized vehicles and our renewable gas supply. So you heard a previous commenter talk about the challenges with these sewer maintenance trucks, Vactors, Vacons, and such. In preparation for a presentation on the Clean Fleet Rule, we reached out to the major sewer maintenance truck manufacturer and talked about the zero emission limitations. And based on the specifications of planned Class 8 truck bodies, zero emission truck bodies, the operating time for a Vactor would be 45 minutes. That's because the power draw is so significant for these sewer maintenance trucks when they're trying to lift water out of flooded situations or maintaining pump station wet wells and lifting grease and debris out, cleaning storm drains. That lift, that that draw is, it takes so much power, it would quickly draw the batteries down. Now, obviously, there's going to be design improvements and such, but this is just based on what's currently offered, the specifications of what's currently offered. Clearly not a tenable situation for regular maintenance or emergency response. So, once again, not to overly belabor what my colleagues have talked about, but maybe to state it in a little bit of a different way. Wastewater treatment plants generate this non-fossil renewable biogas as a part of cleaning sewage to protect public health and the environment. And we use this gas currently in a few different ways. One is generating on-site power, to generate power to run the wastewater treatment plants and provide heat for the treatment process. And the other is a low carbon fuel for our vehicles. Now, we have no objection to electric passenger vehicles. Many of our members already have fully electric passenger vehicles in their fleet. But the challenges with our special vehicles in particular. So as Sarah mentioned, state greenhouse gas reduction policies such as SB 1383 are going to direct food waste away from landfills and to wastewater treatment plants. So we're going to have even more of this non-fossil renewable gas. And we can use this to expedite getting diesel trucks off the road and continue to be able to power our specialized maintenance and emergency response equipment that's needed to protect public health. Looking at the exemptions and that 75% requirement, it's really problematic for a small agency. Some smaller agencies might only have one Vector sewer maintenance truck, or maybe 2 or 3. So to try to have 75% of their fleet zero emission, if it were available, would really be problematic. If they only have 1 or 2 trucks and those trucks are out doing regular maintenance and then need to respond to an emergency, there's no opportunity for charging. So in summary, the wastewater sector has a renewable fuel source, a clean, non-fossil renewable fuel source that's carbon negative. It's derived from treating public waste. It's truly a clean fuel for the clean fleet rule. And using this fuel will expedite getting diesel trucks off the road with equipment that is currently available to use this fuel. We really need an exemption for this sector. And rather than have it being an exemption that needs to be applied for, there are 1,100 wastewater collection systems in the state. There's almost 300 wastewater treatment plants in the state. Rather than everyone submitting their own vehicle exemption and all that labor and time, and then CARB staff having to review each vehicle exemption and all that labor and time. And they're all going to do it because we can't do our job with zero emission vehicles with the current or even near future technology that we see. It would be.
Steve, can you go ahead and wrap up? I want to make sure we give everybody a chance.
I'll wrap it up. Our ask is that there's an exemption for our sector, and not a huge loophole that you can drive a diesel truck through, pun intended, but one that suits our needs so we can continue to serve the public and protect the environment. Thank you for the time today.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve, and we look forward to your comments and writing.
Okay, so next we have Austin.
Yeah. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'll just say, it's like, yeah, everybody, so at this point, I'll just say, because it looks like when we want to make sure we get to everybody who has their hand raised currently. So we're going to try to get through everybody. And so again, we would appreciate if you can kind of make your points. If they've largely been made, then you can summarize them quickly as possible. And we'll go through all the hands that are raised currently. So we'll ask that you not raise your hand anymore. So that we can make sure we get through all of these comments, and by all means, take advantage of submitting us the comments in writing. You can also provide us informal emails, and we can also follow up with either meetings or conversations after the workshop as well. So thank you, everybody. Go ahead, Craig. I mean, Paul.
I guess, do you think it would be helpful to have a timer on the screen, or is that too much?
I think that's too much. We'll try to get, I think we'll be okay with the list that I see on the screen.
Okay. So next I see Austin Avery. I've given you permission to speak. After that, Pat O'Connor. So Austin, if you could unmute yourself and give your affiliation, then begin.
Good morning, gentlemen. This is Austin Avery from Turlock Irrigation District. Just checking real quick. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Awesome. I promise I'll make these comments quick. So first of all, just thank you all so much for hosting this workshop. We think that here at TID, we think that this is definitely the way to go, and we just appreciate the collaboration that you gentlemen have been showing throughout this entire process. So I just want to start by thanking you, and I want to give you a recommendation that we put into our comments with respect to, Tony, your point about sort of this near-term concern that you're hearing from folks like from those at Grass Valley, in SMUD, in Truckee Donner. And I want to give you an idea. And so here's the idea. So CARB currently right now has a definition that's used in the Portable Equipment Registration Program that focuses on defining what an essential public service means and what does it look like. And in that regulation, what it says is that it means a service provided to the general public to protect the public health and safety or the environment. And so TID's idea or thought was as a consequence of this near-term concern when we're talking about EPTOs and sort of the near-term availability and what do we do, and particularly what do we do if there's no replacement. The idea was we take that definition and we apply it to these essential public service providers, juxtaposed against what the California Vehicle Code 165 is saying. And that definition really is only sort of encompassing this near-term constraint, because Tony, you're exactly right. The technology is going to be there as we talk about down the road and as we look down the road. So the thought idea is okay, we take this definition, you put it in there, but then also to echo comments made by Frank Harris and then those at SMUD, you have this technology validation process. We strongly support that, where we can make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's with this in terms of making sure that we're getting these vehicles on board that fit what it is that we need them to do. We think that that gives you a path forward. And as I make these comments, I want to stress too, we're strongly support the electrification process too. We're not talking about these alternative fuels. We're strictly talking about this through the lens of electrification. So I throw that idea out there just for consideration, because we think that what you have right now is a fantastic baseline for which we can build on. We just want to help you as best we can. And this point is coming from our fleet SMEs. So we built this out in our public comments, and we'll probably continue to do so as just an idea for your consideration based on regulations that are already out there and definitions that you're already utilizing. So thank you so much for the opportunity to make these comments, and I'll put myself on pause.
Thank you. We appreciate those comments and the idea.
Okay, so thank you for that. Next we have Pat O'Connor. After that, Carol Kaufman. So Pat, you should be able to unmute. Can you give your name and affiliation and begin?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Pat O'Connor. I represent NAFA Fleet Management Association. Our members are the fleet managers of government and private fleets. A number of our members have participated in this workshop. Many have spoken already. Many have had the opportunity to meet with you individually. I don't want to be redundant, so I will try to go through these comments fairly quickly. One, we are very supportive of the notion of ARB taking the lead to make commercial availability determination and validating that commercial availability. We would agree that a third party should do that, but we also feel that CARB should be ultimately responsible for it. That would enable fleets to determine in advance if vehicles that they're going to be requesting bids on are available or not in the ZEV formulation. We're also interested in the status of NZEVs. In looking at the questions and responses from the last workshop, apparently there is yet to be a list of certified NZEVs. We'd be interested in knowing when you expect certification of NZEBs, and will those certifications be in place by the 2024 timeframe? Based on commercial availability determination, we'd urge you to provide a straightforward exemption for fleets for models and body types that you confirm are not available through this commercial validation process, rather than requiring the fleets to individually come back to you and for you to have to devote your resources to look at those exemptions. There should be a more straightforward process and a commercial evaluation of commercial availability, and then posting that and let fleets work off that. If you have reason to believe that a fleet is seeking exemption for what they're not entitled to, there certainly could be a process to double check that. Not a lot of talk on infrastructure in this call today, in this workshop. We understand from the last workshop that you may be looking at an infrastructure specific workshop in the future. We think that's very important because not only do these government fleets need to be able to acquire the vehicles they need, they also have to be able to put in infrastructure and the investment needed for that infrastructure. We would urge you to put in your rule that you will make the determination that infrastructure is indeed available before the final regulation goes into place. As it stands right now, it seems to be up to each individual fleet to determine whether or not the infrastructure is in place for their fleet. You also heard a little bit about the budget horizons that government fleets deal with for capital expenditures, et cetera. We would request that the implementation date for the public fleet rule be 4 years from the date of the final regulation. That will give public fleets the opportunity to deal with their various governing authorities, to get the authority for the capital investment and make the necessary budget revisions. We also, just to be redundant, we think you've got to give some credit to those fleets that have already invested in things like renewable natural gas. There are fleets that have invested in these fuels, in this infrastructure, and the message being sent is that this investment no longer is appreciated. That again is going to be a policy challenge for the fleet manager when he or she goes back to their governing authority, and the governing authority says, well, what about this investment we've made in the alternative fuel refueling infrastructure? So we would hope that you would give some credit going forward to those fleets that have made substantial investments in RNG, et cetera. With that, again, we thank you for providing this workshop, continuing the discussion going forward with government fleets throughout California.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next we have Carol Kaufman and then Nika Bukamp. So Carol, I've given you permission to speak if you could give your name and affiliation.
Hi, good morning. Okay, so it's Carol Kaufman, Metropolitan Water District. And again, I want to thank, as others have throughout the workshop, for this focused meeting and taking the time to really understand public fleet needs. And we recognize the importance of this regulation, and it does, though, have significant impacts for our operations. And just so you know, we are actively looking at different technologies that are out there, the zero emissions, and we're trying to pilot them. Excuse me, something's in my throat. Oh dear, here. Okay, and we're trying to pilot them where possible to see how they will fit in with our operations. But as you know, it's been challenging. And so we like to partner with CARB to ensure that the transition's made, but that it doesn't compromise our public fleet service mandates. So just for a little bit of background, Metropolitan is a regional water wholesaler. We have about 5,200 square miles of service area covering about 6 counties. And so what do we respond to? We have the emergency disasters, fires, earthquakes, trying to restore water service, but we also have emergency pipeline breaks where one of our lines or infrastructure has a major problem. We have to restore service back for the public. And then we also have shutdowns, critical infrastructure work. We have to maintain and repair that. And I don't know if that's actually been mentioned as much, but we can have like about up to 35 of these types of activities throughout the year. And they can take from a week to several months trying to reinforce our lines. And we have standby folks who actually also take trucks home with them, and then they need to respond to any type of emergency across our service areas. So we have these type of operations to support our service. A lot of our UT trucks are heavily outfitted. They have PTOs, we have water trucks, line trucks, back and dig, and trailers that tow construction equipment. So basically our fleet has to support these situations. And in fact, our operating policy within Metropolitan, it dictates that we have to have sufficient resources such as personnel, material, and equipment to repair 2 major simultaneous pipeline failures. So that's why we have so much concern with this regulation and trying to ensure that it's flexible enough to allow us to continue to perform our work. And so in support of what others have said, I guess our key areas are, one is recognizing the operational constraints of the vehicles, and then the need for also having available ZE fueling infrastructure. And then also providing in the regulation clear and feasible purchase alternatives to give us the ability to be able to procure these vehicles. And so basically one of them is looking at allowing us, if there are no ZEVs available, then being able to purchase NZEVs and also other, maybe the cleanest technology as well that's commercially available at the time that we need them. And then thirdly, allowing for commercially available proven technology that can provide the near-term GHG reductions and criteria pollutant reductions, and to be able to reduce near-term, and then as these ZEVs become more widely available. So in our comment letter that we just submitted, we have specific recommendations, but there are a couple of ones that I wanted to kind of highlight. And one of them is what the gentleman was talking about before, was the purchasing compliance date. And so I think we're asking that the dates for the compliance, it allows for infrastructure development and also to accommodate the government budgeting process. You know, we're in the process right now of looking at our budget over the next few years. And so the first key date that comes up, 2024, maybe it needs to be modified in order to acknowledge the budgeting process. And then also there is the executive order, I think it's B4818, that identifies infrastructure goals. And I think the first set's in 2025 to be developed for charging and also for hydrogen stations. So maybe a suggestion is 3 dates from the effective date of 3 years from the effective date of regulation. I mean, that's a possibility. And by looking at this kind of time frame, it could allow for the ZEV market availability to mature. And then also allow through the ACT regulation also, which increases the required vehicle manufacturer percentage of annual sales. So it could allow that to mature as well. So the bottom line is, again, that we're asking to provide the flexibility in the regulation to allow us to continue to provide our services. And, you know, again, we are actively looking for the new technology, and we're trying to pilot it at our facilities where possible. And I guess, as Ava mentioned to you earlier, we could provide you with a PowerPoint, or with, we'd like to invite you out on one of our shutdowns, but we have the COVID issues still. We have micro teams, but we could put together a PowerPoint to show how we respond during a shutdown. But again, appreciate that you're taking the time to understand our operations.
We would appreciate the presentation. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Okay, next we have Nico, and after that, Nakash Pelham-Thumvid. So Nico, you should be able to unmute, give your affiliation, and begin.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Good morning, Nico Baukum with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Thank you, first of all, for organizing these workshops. It's much appreciated to be able to give some additional feedback that may help you in drafting the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation. I had 3 questions / comments. I'll just basically mention them, and then I'll leave it to you how you want to respond, or which one you want to respond first to. The first one is about slide number 9 with regards to emergency response exemption for public fleets. I was wondering how, if you could maybe expand a little bit on the topic of demonstrating that no infrastructure mobile fueling options were available, considering that demonstrating that in the context of emergency response it may appear a little difficult and may turn into some kind of a scenario situation and demonstrating that, because emergencies obviously you do not want to have to demonstrate that on how that works. So maybe you can expand a little bit on that topic, on what you anticipate that would look like. The next one is in the context of public fleets and them being early adopters, which basically equates higher premiums up front compared to maybe larger fleet and later rollout of zero-emission truck fleets. What is your take on the use of LCFS credits? And I know this touches a little bit on the infrastructure topic, but I'll leave it to you on how you want to fill that in, and how they can be used by public fleets to meet some of these premiums or diffuse some of these premiums that they are exposed to, as well as the topic of zero-emission truck credits. I don't recall the details on the advanced clean truck rule, but I think there are some details in it. But considering the comments that I've heard earlier about this topic, especially with regards to emergency response vehicles, they are very much customized, and even more so than I think the advanced clean truck rule considers. So it's even beyond the OEM providing maybe a chassis. I heard adding batteries on there or packs of some zero emission nature that may be added on even later on than when it comes from an OEM that does some kind of integration or provides some kind of chassis. So that's the second question or comment. And then the last one is related to the infrastructure topic overall. It would be great if you could give a rough estimate of the schedule for an infrastructure work group meeting. Thank you.
So let me cover a couple of those. Let me do the last one first, since it's kind of the easier one. Yeah, we'll put any future meetings on our website and send a notice like you've received for this particular meeting. At this point, we're looking at November timeframe to start that series. Could be slightly earlier, could be through November, possibly December, depending on the number. But the idea there is to have multiple meetings. So at least a few, and potentially more. So I think we'll announce that as soon as we can in the coming weeks, is all I can say, but it's not too far out.
Thank you.
In terms of the infrastructure not available, yeah, I mean, there is an aspect to that it's gonna be that area. There's gonna be some area of judgment, but basically if in principle it's, hey, you have lighter vehicles and there's retail stations that you could use that work for light duty or for a smaller truck, then I think it'd be pretty hard to make a demonstration. It's like, no, I'm not going to be able to realistically fuel it where I need it. And then some of the discussions we've had, it's some of the emergency use or services that some of the fleets provide are just in their own local area. And if they have their own infrastructure and fuel the vehicles, it wouldn't make sense to provide an exemption. And again, the light duty thing could be, battery electric vehicles and or hydrogen stations that are around. Anything up to 10 kilograms can use the protocol that's already exists for light duty, for example. And then as you get into some of the bigger trucks, then yeah, is there either retail stations available to do the fueling where you're likely to need it? And so there's an aspect to where it might be needed. And so some of that will be based on some history and either, as kind of touched on today, it's like, yeah, if there are mutual aid agreements as to where the vehicles might go and for example, go out of state. And if there is no infrastructure network out there, then that would be fairly straightforward to make that type of demonstration. So that's kind of the idea. So there is it's not a simple check the box answer. You need to look at, what's available, and we foresee that where stations will be mapped out, and ultimately what type of service you're providing and what the needs would be part of that. We talked about LCFS credits for public fleets. It wasn't clear on the question. I mean, we would expect public fleets to be able to take advantage of LCFS. I don't know. Did anybody have a more specific on
I can expand on that a tad bit. Volvo in their comments on the previous workshop submitted some comments related to LCFS credits used in the context of CEC. So it's outside of CARB's realm to meet some of the funding needs for I think for also the rollout of zero emission trucks. So maybe you're not the one to expand on that, but maybe ask Volvo about how that practically would work out. So that's really where that question came from. But then the question about zero emission truck credits is more applicable to this work group, I think, and how that applies for these customized vehicles, heavily customized vehicles that were mentioned earlier during the call.
Okay. I mean, as the current public fleet language is strictly based on purchases, so there isn't a credit per se other than tracking the number of vehicles. There is a credit mechanism that effectively, and looking at the language, we can make it even more obvious, is any purchases made from now to even when the rule starts would count towards your compliance option. And so that would provide flexibility for the future if you're saying, hey, look, I'm going to buy some ZEVs in the next couple of years because they will fit my needs and my particular application, so that when I'm making a purchase in 2026, I know that I can effectively use that as a credit to then buy one of these more vehicles that you find more challenging to electrify, for instance. So there is a little bit of flexibility in that regard. And then in terms of the specialty vehicles, this is a little bit of where we think we need more information about some of the trucks that are being called out here and their use. Because by and large, a lot of the medium duty and well, a number of the heavy duties are chassis that are certified and available, and then a body gets put on later, whether it's a service body or some kind of Vector or something like that. So it could be not very sophisticated vehicle and can end up being a very sophisticated integration. So I think there's a range there. So I'm not clear on the, so to the extent we can get additional information on either a way to identify the ones that would be most challenging or aren't available per se. We're interested in more details on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nico. Next we have Nakash, then Stacy Heaton. So I might have clicked the wrong one. Okay, Nakash, you should have permission to unmute if you could give your affiliation and begin.
Hi, this is Nakash Palathamir from Cummins. I just want to clarify something you touched on earlier. So ACT rule requires manufacturers to certify their zero-emission vehicles using CARB ZEB procedure from 2024. Mm-hmm. Is there a similar requirement here that the ZEBs purchased by fleets have to be certified, recognizing that ACT only regulates large manufacturers?
I think the way the regulation is currently structured, there is not a requirement in ACF to only purchase these vehicles. I think our general idea is because manufacturers will need to certify for ZEB cert, there's no need to have another requirement. And regarding ACT, while there isn't a requirement that smaller manufacturers aren't affected, but if they want to generate ZEV credits and sell them to other manufacturers, they would need to meet ZEB cert in that instance, which we do expect most smaller manufacturers to go through with. So there isn't, I guess, a hard requirement, but it's something we expect in the vast majority of cases.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Nakash, are you able to speak about Cummins' venture into zero emission space and the plug-in hybrid space?
I don't want to comment on it at the moment, but we can have a conversation later with Carl.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we have Stacy Heaton, then Jennifer Goodsell. So Stacy, you should be able to unmute, give your affiliation and begin.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Great. Stacy Heaton with the Rural County Representatives of California, and I'm going to be brief because I think a lot of my points have already been made, and you guys also have a pretty comprehensive comment letter from us. But I wanted to especially echo the comments that Stephen Poncelet made earlier about the differences in the rural landscape, particularly in the more mountainous communities. And with regards to the public safety power shutoffs, I know that that's a comment that we've made a couple of times, During wildfire season, we've been subject in a lot of our communities to multi-day public safety power shutoffs, and that's going to really make it challenging. We don't see this wildfire problem going away anytime soon, unfortunately. So that's going to make the use of electric vehicles in our communities a lot more challenging, along with the challenges of just getting the infrastructure for zero emission vehicles into our community. So it's just something that compounds the problem even more. And then I want to echo the comments from a lot of people about just looking forward to seeing the exemption language fleshed out a little bit more, having the uncertainty around what that might look like, getting exemptions for technology that's not yet available will, I think, make our folks feel a lot better about this process. We're already dealing with, in a lot of our communities, some rulemakings that aren't under your purview, but things like SB 1383 implementation and implementation of other programs that right now there's a lot of uncertainty around implementation of that. And so this just kind of compounds that even further, particularly with solid waste pickup and things like that. And so having some certainty around that, particularly in rural communities where we're in attainment for a lot of the pollution that these vehicles are trying to get at, would be very helpful. So I will end my comments there. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate for your written comments too.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Stacy. Next, we have Jennifer Goodsell. After that, Bradley Northrop. Okay, Jennifer, you should be able to unmute. Can you give your affiliation and begin?
Hi, yes, good morning, everyone. Jennifer Goodsell, Imperial Irrigation District. I too will limit my comments this morning in light of the limited time frame. I did provide comments at the September workshop, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak again today. IID is an irrigation district and a public power provider. We're spread out over very rural and disadvantaged Imperial and Riverside counties with service territories that cover about 6,500 square miles. As previously has been stated, IID supports the state's goals to promote clean transportation options, and we do not dispute the direction that fleet electrification is headed. From my agency's perspective, our concerns are timing, infrastructure, and product availability. I'd like to provide CARB staff with an open invitation to tour IID's service territory and get a firsthand look at the remote locations that we provide both water and energy to, as well as the distant and isolated locations that our transmission, distribution, and generation infrastructure resides. It's one thing to hear about it, but it's an entirely different perspective.
Jennifer?
The electric vehicle market is on last mile deliveries and drayage fleets. There are no products on the market now or in the foreseeable future that serve vocational applications, especially those with a battery operated PTO system. I'm referring to the specialty line construction equipment with PTO operated hydraulic systems, as well as dump trucks, water trucks, and even vacuum trucks, just to name a few. As a utility, we are in close communication with our manufacturers, and they are telling us that they aren't anywhere close to commercial production. It's one thing to have a battery operate the motor of your truck as it travels down the road, but it's an entirely different technology to also have it function at a work site for the duration of an 8, 10, 12, or even a 14-hour shift, and then still be able to get the employee back to their operations yard. IID agrees that the transition needs to be made, but we also have an obligation to our employees to provide them with safe and functional equipment. The technology for zero emission vehicles in the utility specific vocational medium and heavy duty classes, it doesn't really exist yet. And the safety testing of these products hasn't been conducted. In these specialty applications, if CARB would consider requiring that a vehicle's capability and reliability under a variety of operating circumstances be demonstrated before a purchase requirement be implemented, it would be appreciated. The work that these employees perform is dangerous, especially on the electric side, and it could be a life or death situation for them if the equipment is faulty and unproven. And I personally would never forgive myself if something happened to one of my employees, especially if it is something that could have been prevented. That's why I'm expressing this concern today, and it is a real concern, especially from the safety side. The specialty equipment serves a unique purpose, and it keeps the lights on and the water flowing in this state. And I'm just asking that you please reevaluate the specialty equipment separately as part of this regulation. And then lastly, the one, I won't cover things that other people have mentioned today, but I did not hear anything about requesting that any consideration be given to the automotive supply chain disruptions that everyone's experiencing. The fleet industry as a whole has been severely impacted by the ongoing effects of the global pandemic. We've seen an unprecedented interruption in the manufacturing and distribution of the computer microchips. There have been manufacturing plant shutdowns, worldwide shortages in raw materials, and astonishing cost increases in steel, aluminum, and petroleum-based products. We've been told that Ford has over 55,000 F-350, 450, and 550 units partially built and sitting there waiting for parts or components, and that number is growing daily. And then we've also been told that Daimler Manufacturing, just to name one, has over 16,000 units in the same condition. And I would just respectfully request that you please take these factors into consideration when finalizing your regulation. And anytime you want to come down, just let me know. You're more than welcome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for the comments. We appreciate it. All right, next we have Bradley Northrup and then Allison Torres. So Bradley, you should be able to unmute, give your affiliation and begin.
Thank you, Paul. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm Bradley Northup. I'm the City of Carlsbad Public Superintendent for Fleets. I would like to thank you first for your efforts to date in holding these meetings, keeping these workshops inclusive of all the sectors that are being impacted by the proposed regulation. It's been many workshops, but it's all coming together. I'd like to first start with following up with a comment by Pat O'Connor regarding the commercial vehicle availability. If we could have that implemented, if you could also include published pricing at the time that that vehicle is identified as available, even if it's just MSRPs, that's going to assist fleet managers in helping to budget our costs and our ROIs, modeling forward for our future fleet replacement planning, which may target certain vehicle types and body types over the other, depending on the sector and the technology of the vehicle available. My next area would be regards to the public fleet exemption area. If you can very quickly just provide clarification of whether this is an exemption or an extension. The statement regarding the executive officer below this item is currently contradicting it, at least seemingly, that this is not necessarily an exemption to the rule, but an extension in compliance. I'd also ask if we could change the exemption criteria to be, instead of all inclusive, but rather one or more of the conditions be met to apply and be considered for an exemption. Rather, for example, if more than 75% of that body type in the fleet is already ZEV, you can apply for an exemption, or that agency is able to demonstrate that a vehicle isn't publicly accessible or suitable for that role, simply because the numbers of fleets for that 75% rule don't add up. We have a wastewater division here. We have 2 Vector trucks. According to this rule, both of them would need to be converted, which means I do not have a backup in diesel if we do have public power safety shutoffs or major power failures in the area. And we need to be able to have some type of backup, which means I'm forced to buy an additional reserve vehicle or hold on to a vehicle even longer, expanding our fleet size and increasing public cost. Lastly, requesting some sort of reference and inclusion to the exemption language referencing Government Code 835 regarding dangerous conditions of public property, whereas a specialty vehicle used in emergency response situations could apply for an exemption to this rule, so long as that public agency is able to establish to the satisfaction of the governing body that conversion of that vehicle does not impact the ability of that entity to respond with sufficient time to mitigate any injury or condition caused by their public property, a dangerous condition of the public property. And thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, so just to touch on briefly here, the exemption versus extension. Yeah, I think in the language, we refer to it as an exemption, and then later we use the word extension rather than exemption. That was just a drafting error. With the word extension should be replaced with exemption. The concept is, if you're approved for the exemption, then that allows you to go ahead and buy effectively a conventional vehicle and use that until you replace it, and then make that same determination at that point. However many years it is you keep that vehicle.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Allison Torres, then Don Ramp. So Allison, you should be able to unmute to give your affiliation and begin.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. Good morning. My name is Allison Torres with Eastern Municipal Water District. I will try to be brief, as many of my comments have indirectly been spoken, but EMWD is a water, wastewater, and recycled water agency in Southern California. We really appreciate the conversation and opportunity to discuss concerns with the draft language. And while we support CARB's overall goals for reductions, and we understand the need for some type of technology forcing approach, we do feel that's important to recognize that one size doesn't fit all. Essential public services are critical to our communities, and reliable equipment to respond to emergencies is extremely critical. A technology mix to ensure that we have the appropriate equipment to respond to emergencies 24/7 is imperative, and it is our civic responsibility to our customers and our ratepayers. We need to make sure that the rule doesn't prevent our ability to provide these critical services. There was a comment earlier by Tony that CARB's expectation is that an agency's response when a ZEV or NZEV is not available is to defer the purchase. That's very concerning and is not always feasible. So this appears to be an important gap that needs to be addressed in the rule. As stated in some of the previous comments, the exemption for emergency services is not really an option if you don't have 75% of a vehicle body type as ZEV. So it's basically this narrow cyclic pathway where you can't really utilize that exemption language when the vehicle is not available. So while we understand that CARB's expectation and hope, as it is ours as well, that ZEVs will be available for all body types and will align with the ACT, the rule language doesn't adequately address situations where this doesn't occur, and essentially makes public fleets compliance with the proposed rule while still allowing us to maintain a reliable fleet to provide critical services extremely difficult. We have an obligation to our customers and our ratepayers to ensure we can properly respond to water main breaks, sewage overflows, and other unforeseen emergencies. So I appreciate you considering these comments. A couple other additional comments. We do support third-party technology assessments, and we share some of the other concerns related to infrastructure. It sounds like there's going to be another work group on this. And I'd also like to echo comments made by some others, specifically Carol Kaufman, David Rothbart, Sarah Delorier, and Steve Jepson, especially related to RNG opportunities to fill some of the gaps while achieving reductions. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for the comments, Allison. We appreciate it. Okay, next we have Don Lamp and then Nick Blair. Don, you should be able to unmute yourself. Can you give your affiliation and begin?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Don Lampy, San Francisco Water. I really just want to piggyback on what everybody else is saying regarding availability and also emergency status. During Loma Prieta, we had over 400 main breaks in San Francisco. We had main gang trucks, which is large, used to be F650s, now they're Peterbilts or whatever we can get. They were out on site 24/7 for 4 weeks, working on repairing main breaks, providing water for the fire department. We have vehicles that respond to second alarm and higher fires so that they can control the water system and allow more water in to fight fires. We also have a dedicated firefighting system, our auxiliary water supply system in San Francisco. And they also respond to large fires to operate that system. They cannot leave during a fire until they are released by the fire department. If they are in an electric vehicle and they are out in the street over a valve, operating that valve, and have their light bars operating to protect them and other vehicles on the road, I don't know how they would be able to operate if a fire goes long-term, as they sometimes do. We've had some large fires in the city and they've been on site, you know, up to 10 hours. So I just want you guys to have that in mind and consider that. The Loma Prieta, although there was significant damage during that earthquake, that was not considered the big one that we see coming. In the marina, PG shut off gas and electricity. There was no utilities there. We were in there trying to repair the water so the fire department would have water and so the citizens would have water for fire life safety. Fuel, food, water was shuttled out to those crews and materials to do the repairs. So I'm just, the emergency exemption is very narrow of going, following Vehicle Code 165. And I just don't want to see something happen here where we're forced to go with technology that maybe is not proven or available. I want to add, we did buy actual hybrid trucks for the main gang, some Peterbilt 335s back in 2010. They made those trucks for 1 year. They no longer support them. The last time we had an outage, they struggled to get a CPU for that truck. And we had to bring another truck to them so they could download the software and put it on the new CPU to make that truck operable. And that is one of the trucks that go service main brakes and emergency response. So I just, I appreciate your time. I just want to put that on the table that when everything's working fine, it's great and the technology works. But in an emergency situation where you're out in the field, I mean, how do we respond? During Loma Prieta, we had the military come in, we had, you know, everyone come in to support us, but there was no available electricity as things were shut down for a while. And the same in Paradise, when we went to school in Paradise, there was no electricity up there. Anyway, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the comments. We appreciate them too. Okay, so it looks like we have 3 commenters left. Nick Blair, David Worthington, and David Rettler. So we should be able to get through all 3 in the time remaining. So Nick, you have been unmuted. If you could give your affiliation and begin.
Yeah, very good. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. Hi, this is Nick Blair with the Association of California Water Agencies. Many thanks to CARB staff for all your hard work on this and keeping this meeting within 3 hours. Having workshops like this is very helpful for all of us. It's been a great conversation with you, and I will keep it brief since we've had many comments similar in theme to that which I would say, including those by Eva Plager, Janet Whitlock, Stephen Poncelot, Frank Harris, Austin Avery, Carol Kaufman, Jennifer Goodsell, Allison Torres, as well as the gentleman from City of Fairfield, Carlsbad, San Francisco, and Nevada County, and countless others. So as others have said, we're supportive of the overall concept of clean vehicles where feasible for fleet electrification, but as you probably saw within our letter, we want to reiterate the requests for flexibility that are needed for critical public service providers, as noted by members and non-members alike today. We want to be sure that we get this rulemaking correct, as you've heard from our diverse member base, from members all across the state of all sizes. And with that, we want to applaud our numerous member agencies that have submitted comment letters thus far and encourage more to do so ahead of the deadline on October 29th. And also encouraging CARB to further those discussions and take our members up on those site visits. We want to be sure that the critical needs of service providers like public water and wastewater agencies are maintained. The challenges and flexibilities are acknowledged where ZEVs and NZEVs are not feasible, where duty cycles can't be met, including one-to-one replacement, and exemption processes are workable when needed. So we do look forward to our call with you in the coming weeks with numerous of the folks that you heard today, as well as our continued efforts with coalition partners. One question I do have, when is the next version of this rulemaking going to come out post addressing comments that we've had?
Well, I guess the best answer I can provide you is I don't rightfully know. As you know, we've been scheduling a number of meetings and we'll be having the infrastructure discussion.
Gotcha.
Throughout the year. And so based on we've gotten a number of written comments. I anticipate we'll get quite a few more. And so we'll be looking at all of that to then make the determination what the next step is.
Very good. Thanks. Look forward to our call with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, Next, we have David Worthington, then David Rentschler. So David W., you should be unmuted and give your affiliation and begin.
Great, thank you. David Worthington, County of Santa Clara Fleet Manager. First, thank you very much for holding this workshop. It's very helpful to be able to get a lot of different views on the challenges with the regulation, but also the positive impacts that it's going to have for our society here in California. I'm just going to go quickly through some bullet points. We do need a fleet reduction credit option where we can apply for a credit because we've reduced our overall fleet size in the trucks that are over 8,500 pounds gross vehicle weight, because we're reducing the emissions for the vehicle, which will be equivalent to a zero emissions vehicle. But on top of that, we're also reducing the greenhouse gas emissions associated with producing a brand new vehicle. So it's a win-win for the government fleets as well as for carbon, the air that we breathe. The Great Recession and pandemic have reduced funding for fleet vehicle replacements at a lot of government agencies. The funding was taken away. It's been slow to come back. Because of that, most fleet managers adopted their vehicle replacement programs and focused on not a single truck that costs $1 million, but multiple trucks in order to get the fleet as close to possible operationally. Unfortunately, all those medium duty and heavy duty expensive trucks are the ones that we're going to be replacing starting in 2024 and beyond. And they're also the ones that are most challenged to have a zero emissions vehicle available for. So the 50% replacement criteria is going to be very hard if we don't have some other way of getting to that point in 2024, 2025. Most government agencies cannot take out loans for a large infrastructure project or vehicle replacements. They have to go through a funding request that could include a bond or a public referendum of voting, and that voting can be tied to common election cycles. So there's no short path to be able to get that funding approved, and we could be delayed even longer in having funding to build the infrastructure out. The emergency response take-home vehicles, we can't mandate employees have charging infrastructure at their homes. We can't mandate employees to live close to operational areas. We can't mandate employees to live near DC fast charger infrastructure, and commute miles can take up a significant amount of the battery charge capacity. Therefore, having an employee drive an EV car to a location that had a medium duty, heavy duty truck that they would use in emergency operation is not feasible, and it defeats the purpose of having take-home vehicles. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it. Look forward to future workshops.
Thank you for the comments. We appreciate hearing from you. Okay, we have David Rentschler. You should be able to unmute yourself and speak.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to put my MEMA hat on and speak on behalf of several of our agencies. Many of our agencies use a minimum of 5 years in the construction industry when they write their specifications, so that they have a vehicle that's tested and used and they know is going to work. I heard earlier that that might not be possible in the future because of some of the startups and so forth. So that presents a problem for a lot of past practice and policies that our members have. The next one, there was some talk about third-party testing. And so we wanted to bring up something similar to the Altoona testing for transit, where vehicles are put through testing procedures that are standardized, especially for some of these vehicles, heavy equipment, on-road vehicles that are going to be used for some of the public works, health and safety issues, where they would be tested and certified, possibly by CARB, so that we know they're safe to use. And then the last thing I have is, with the current situation in ordering vehicles, something that was brought to my attention was an agency ordered similar, same make and model, similar builds one in January, one in last week of January, one in the first week of February. They were told last week that by the OEM, the first one's going to get built this year, hopefully. The next one didn't make their cutoff. They reduced their cutoff production quota, and it won't be made until the next model year. So it'll be in line for the next model year towards the front of the build process. If that happens during 2024 through 2026, and the PO's been cut, it's officially been ordered, it's 6 months later, and the agency gets notified by the OEM that they're not going to be providing that vehicle, how's the agency going to meet their 50% if they were counting on that ZEV vehicle? Another example that was brought up was a Kenworth water tender truck, 3,600 gallon truck, ordered in June, notified last week that that truck, the OEM decided to cut production early. So that truck is no longer going to be built this year and is now going to have to be built next year. And they're actually going to turn off the T440 chassis. And so they're going to now have to go to a T480 chassis, a whole new chassis, and refigure out what specs they're going to use for that truck at no fault of the agencies. So how would that be addressed if that agency was counting on that Class 8 truck to be able to meet their 50%? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna get the first one because I think I'm assuming I got that one understood. So the scenario was an order has been placed, the vehicle is now being delivered later than expected, actually a different model year than originally expected, but the purchase would still be fulfilled. So in that example, the reg language is based on the purchase order date, and the vehicle delivery date is determining compliance. So if that order is fulfilled just later than expected, it would still be, it would still count towards the 50% purchase requirement for that purchase in the calendar year. So I don't, unless I missed it, I don't see a problem there. On the other example, again, sounds like if the 440 chassis isn't available anymore, the manufacturer changes something after the fact. If the order is still fulfilled with a different chassis, I guess we don't have a specific language on that, but I don't foresee a problem there. If you're in essence saying, no, you have to go out for bid again and do a new purchase, then I don't know.
That is what they had to, that is the example. They had to go back out to bid again.
Okay, so in that case, they were counting on a ZEV purchase that didn't get delivered in this scenario. And they still got the other purchases presumably delivered. And so they would be short on the ZEV requirement.
Yes, they would be short that year, but then they would make it up the next year because it would come in. Yeah. They would have an extra one for the next year.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't know we have any language that addresses that other than obviously if the fleet was over complying and then it wasn't required to put it to count, they wouldn't have an issue. But if they were either just making the purchase the first time around or whatever, and they didn't get delivered, then yeah, I guess we don't have language on that. So I guess we'll just note it and see what we need to do about a scenario like that.
Is there a way that you could average years if you are short one year because of an incident like this?
Yeah, I think there's a range of concepts. I mean, that could possibly address a scenario like that. That part of it would be identifying what those scenarios are, and that's in part when we talk exemptions, that's kind of the way we've approached it, is like, hey, there's a mechanism to address it. This would be not an exemption per se, but we would have to write something into it to be able to address it.
And the last was the third-party testing, similar to Altoona for transit.
Right. Yeah, so obviously we heard that comment today of a third-party evaluation. Now you're talking about testing specifically. I mean, I do not foresee necessarily doing an Altoona-like program associated with this rule. But there may be other ways to address the concerns, and I think some of the comments were, either associated with third party. I mean, obviously we, as you may be aware, I mean, as part of our funding programs, we are doing data collection and gaining experience with the vehicles in use and actual fleet operation. And that kind of information is shared, so that's something that will help. But yeah, I find it hard to imagine that we would do a full-blown performance type testing program associated with this rule.
Yeah, and I can maybe add that we will be requiring, as we've touched on a couple of times, the zero-emission powertrain certification program. So that'll have some minimum requirements that manufacturers must meet for the powertrain. I think it's a 3-year, 50,000-mile warranty, like reliability, standardized diagnostic tools, and a few other factors. I know that on light duty, we're doing some more work on ZEV durability and that type of just ensuring that the consumers are receiving a good product. We could look at that for heavy duty, but I don't think we are at that stage at the moment.
I think due to the cost of these vehicles and the unavailability of agencies to have spares, it might be something that would make the agencies and the elected officials that approve these budgets, they would be more willing to go this direction if they had some assurances.
David, you said not able to have spares. I'm not clear on that. If I had a vehicle that maybe isn't that I ultimately want to replace because of reliability and other reasons, there's nothing here that would prevent you from keeping that vehicle around if you needed it as a spare.
Other than operational budgets, the
okay
cost and manpower it takes to, or personnel to maintain that vehicle, sometimes are, for the smaller agencies, or it's not possible.
Yeah, and maybe it's the terminology. So a spare you're thinking of is more of a vehicle that vehicles that you kind of rotate in and out of maintenance and operate them as part of your fleet versus a backup vehicle that's more just there in case of an unexpected kind of situation.
Yeah, so for example, say you got 6 dump trucks and you have 5 go out every day, so one might have to be in for bid inspection or something like that, so it rotates through.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, so slightly different terminology. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I see that we have one hand went up. This is Ray Pingle, so I suppose we can let him go. This will be the last commenter for today. So Ray, could you give your affiliation and begin?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I'll be very brief. This is Ray Pingle, Sierra Club, California. And thank you for this awesome workshop and for recording it. We all very much appreciate it. I just wanted to call your attention, as well as the stakeholders involved, attention to a document we posted in the docket. It's comment number 38. The title of the document is California EV Charging Infrastructure Development Sufficiency. So this is a document that several of us in our coalition, the ACF coalition, drafted so that we could learn in our own advocacy what's happening in the state with infrastructure, to develop an understanding of it, and then to be able to share that information in kind of an executive summary format with all the stakeholders. So it's a 14-page executive summary, and for those that have questions about what is the state doing, what is the public sector doing, and infrastructure in the state, we would just invite you to look this document up and read it. And I think it'll be informative in preparation for the infrastructure work group meetings, Tony, and the rest of it you're planning on having. And thank you for putting that in the schedule, and it's very important. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray, for the comment and for posting the document in the docket. As far as I can see, that's all we have no more hands raised.
Okay, so thank you everybody who participated in the meeting. So we do appreciate your verbal comments. We'll appreciate some follow-up, and as we touched on, some of the use examples that were raised, is we would greatly appreciate some information or background information on the way you use certain vehicles. That helps us put in more context on how to potentially approach the concern that was raised. And then obviously look forward to our follow-up meetings. Again, the infrastructure, appreciate that participants did, I think, defer to an extent some of the infrastructure issues and concerns, because we will have that series. We will post that as soon as we can, and we'll continue the dialogue on the rule. And anybody who's broadly listening, I guess, and so the other meetings have been already scheduled, and we'll schedule a few more. Same way we've been announcing these to continue the discussion on other aspects of the regulation as well. So thank you very much. I guess we'll see you at the next time. Bye, everyone.